Okay, good morning. Welcome to BCP Planning Committee, Eastern Committee on the 20th of November. If we can please open up with housekeeping.
Please note that this meeting is being recorded by the Council for live broadcast and will be published on the Council website for a minimum of 6 months. The meeting may also be recorded or streamed for live or subsequent broadcast by members of the public, although ultimate discretion in this matter lies with the chair in case of disruption. For those in the room, please note that if the fire alarm sounds, please exit the building by way of the nearest available signed fire exit route and make your way to the assembly point at the War Memorial in the gardens opposite of the front of the building in Bourne Avenue. Finally, please ensure background noise is kept to a minimum. Mobile phones and other devices are turned off or switched to silent for the duration of the meeting. For those in the room, this includes turning off microphones and turning the volume down completely on your laptops. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And item 1, apologies.
So we've had apologies from Councillor Joe Salmon, and substitute members, Councillor Kate Salmon is here for Councillor Joe Salmon today.
Okay, thank you. So I'm Councillor Paul Hilliard. I'm the chair of the committee, and I'll just introduce who else are on the tables at the moment.
Hello, I'm Councillor Marion Le Pedvin, Councillor for Newtown and Heatherlands, and I'm Vice Chair of this committee.
Councillor Michael Tarling for Christchurch Town Ward.
Councillor Joe Clements, Penhill Ward.
Councillor Patrick Callaghan, Boscombe West.
Good morning, Councillor Felicity Rice, Oakdale Ward.
And Councillor Kate Salmon, I represent Moordown Ward.
Councillor Matt Gillett from Talbot Woods.
Councillor David Flagg, Burton Grange Ward.
Toby Slade, Muscombe and Stratton Park.
George Sanders, Planning Officer.
Laura Sims, Planning Officer.
Simon Gould, Development Management Manager.
Thank you. Online, we're also joined by Eden Evans, Planning Officer, Julie Addington, Planning Officer, and Brian Convey, who's a Legal Services Officer, and later we'll be joined by Pritpal Singh Swam, also a Legal Services Officer, and in the room, Democratic Services are Jill Hollyoak and Christiane Tan. Okay, item 3 is declarations of interest. Gillett.
Yeah, I'll be stepping out on the item about the Lower Gardens because I'm chair of the Lower Gardens Trust Board.
Thank you. Councillor Salmon.
Yes, I will be recusing myself for item 6B, which is an application that I actually called in, and I'll be speaking as a ward councillor for that item only.
Okay, thank you. And if any, as we go through the meeting, if anything suggests that you have an interest in, please call that out. Now, item 4 is confirmation of minutes from the 23rd of October 2025. We've had those for a few weeks. Anything to call out? No. Are you happy to confirm those are correct record?
Yes.
That's agreed. Thank you. Item 5 is public issues. So after the officer presentations, we will hear any public speakers, followed by any ward councillors who wish to speak. Item 6 is schedule of planning applications, and 6A is Purbeck Court. Mr. Gould?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Hopefully members have seen the update in the addendum sheet that was issued yesterday. Unfortunately, there was been an administrative error insofar as that normally we would issue letters to people that made representation on a planning application. It came to light on late Tuesday afternoon this week that somebody who had made representation hadn't received their letter. So taking that into consideration and not wanting to disadvantage that person from being able to attend and the meeting and to potentially have a say, we felt it was reasonable to ask members to defer the item, and we would look to bring it back at December's Eastern Planning Committee. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Gould. I understand the system has been updated, that that error can't happen.
No, it can't happen now because the application is quite old. It was an error that occurred through our old system. We're now, obviously, as you'll be aware, working in a new system where that particular task is automated.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. So I move to defer. Do I have a seconder for that?
I'll second.
Councillor Le Pedevin. Any other debate on this? It's a pretty clear-cut reason. So to vote, all in favour of deferment? That's unanimous. Thank you. Thank you. Item 6B is 95 Charminster Avenue, and that is Ms Sims. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. Yeah, so my application is 95 Charminster Avenue. It is for alterations, loft conversion to include a dormer window and roof light, and change of use from a single dwelling house class use class C3 to an 8-person house at multiple occupation. And I am recommending this application for approval. 95 Charminster Avenue is located within the residential area of the Moordown Ward in Bournemouth. The site sits on the corner of Malvern Road to the north and Charminster Avenue. Notable characteristics of the area include a small parade of shops to the west of the site and St Walburga's Catholic Primary School to the north. This slide shows the red line plan. You'll note that the single-storey approved extension under application 7-2024-29293 TPD is shown where my cursor currently is in this section here. The proposed site is a detached 2-storey dwelling characterised by red brick, bay windows and a decorative gable end to the front elevation. The original dwelling appears to have fallen into somewhat of disrepair, with windows being boarded up. The far right photo shows the small parade of shops in the distance, as mentioned before, just where my cursor is now. The aerial view of this site has not been updated to show the extension. However, the street view photos, which were taken in April 2025, and my own site photos do show that the extension is now in situ as per the red line plan. You can also see that there has been some site clearance to the property to the front and rear gardens. The principle of this development is subject to policy CS24 to ensure that there is not an overconcentration of HMOs within a 100-metre area. The shown map indicates the 100-metre area in blue, which was used to calculate the percentage of HMOs. 61 properties were identified to be in the area, with only one being identified as a HMO, which is number 89 Charminster Avenue. Not including this proposal, this gives a percentage of 1.6%, so including the proposed site, this will give a percentage of 3.2, which is well below the 10% laid out in policy CS24 of the Bournemouth Core Strategy. Therefore, in this regard, the proposal is acceptable in principle. The proposal would include alterations to the roof, to the roof to accommodate the 8th bedroom. There would be a small pitched roof dormer to the front elevation of the site, which would be in keeping with the character of the proposed site and surrounding area, as seen where my cursor is now. Other alterations to the site include the patio doors to the front elevation, additional 2 windows to the extension, side elevation door and rear facing skylight, which would all be characteristic of a residential area and in keeping with the site and surroundings. As such, the proposal is considered in keeping with the character and complies with policy CS41 of the core strategy. To provide context, the application also applied earlier this year for the conversion into 4 flats. The plans shown are the refused plans, which were refused on out of character and over intensification to the site. As you can see, compared to the current application, this includes 2 hipped gables and 2 large flat roof dormers. So in terms of design, the concerns have been significantly overcome and is now much more in keeping with the original dwelling and the street scene. The proposal would include 8 bedrooms, all of single occupancy with personal en-suites. The dwelling would provide 1 large communal space of a kitchen/living room on the ground floor, leading to a shared outdoor amenity space within the front garden. The living conditions of future residents would comply with the national space standards and create a good quality design with adequate light to each habitable room. The use of the dwelling would remain as residential, and the site would not be considered as harmful intensification to the plot. Noise produced by the dwelling would be a result of residential activity and therefore is not a concern. Additionally, as the site is detached and a corner plot, there is sufficient spacing between the dwellings as to any noise not to cause adverse harm. There has also been a management plan included which discusses how this property will be maintained. Some concern was raised due to overlooking. However, no new windows are being introduced at first floor level. Whilst not specified in the existing plans, it is likely that the use of first floor has historically been bedrooms. Therefore, the change of use to a HMO, which would keep the first floor as bedrooms, would not increase harmful overlooking to neighbouring amenity. The high-level window within the side elevation of the extension would not cause any harmful overlooking. Overall, the proposal would not cause an over-intensification to the site. The use would remain residential, and therefore the comings and goings would be characteristic of the surrounding area. No concern is raised for the amenity of future residents or neighbours. Therefore, the policy also complies with policy CS 41. Finally, one off-road parking space has been provided for the HMO, which is in line with the BCP parking standards SPD. The local highway authority was consulted, and they have deemed this of adequate size with acceptable visibility space. The cycle store appears to be large enough to provide sufficient cycle parking. However, the internal layout has not been specified and therefore has been conditioned for this information to be provided within 3 months of commencement. Overall, the application complies with policy CS24, CS41, CS16 and 18 and promotes additional and diverse residential accommodation within the area and therefore is recommended for approval. Thank you.
Thank you for that presentation. So if we move over to speakers, please.
Thank you, Chair. So we have 2 registered objectors. The first is Bethany Booth. Bethany's with us in person. So whenever you're ready, you've got 2.5 minutes.
So I own 93 Chalmers Avenue. My husband and I purchased property a year ago to provide a safe home and a settled, family-friendly neighbourhood. We urge the committee to be guided by principles of safe and sensible town planning. The risks inherent in this proposal considerably outweigh any benefits. Developers can always find ways to tick boxes to maximise profits. In this case, technical policy compliance does not equate to the right course of action, as the strength of local feeling demonstrates. 90 people have taken the time to raise concerns. An 8-bed HMO that will attract a transient population to low-cost bedsits without parking directly opposite a primary school on a dangerous junction where unsafe parking already plagues residents would be completely inappropriate. The plans over-intensify the use of the plot and waste an opportunity to provide decent family housing, either 2 spacious flats or a family home near to schools. The council recognises the road dangers and is currently trialling road closures affecting this very junction at school pick-up and drop-off times. Approving these plans would undermine this positive intervention. Residents are genuinely concerned that the junction is an accident waiting to happen and pedestrian safety should continue to be the priority. In my husband's experience as a police officer, HMOs inevitably bring higher levels of antisocial behaviour, drug use, crime and safeguarding issues. The plans are unacceptable given the proximity to schools and a women's refuge. The planning team didn't accept our invite to come to our property as part of the site assessment, and our valid design concerns are not captured in the report. We refute the assessment at point 37 and stress that the plans will significantly impact on our amenity and privacy. The plot's really elevated, so a side passage for a bin store and courtyard along our fence line will cause direct overlooking and noise. We won't be able to enjoy our kitchen and garden, which is the hub of our family home. A communal front garden is also completely out of character with the area. 8 adults will generate a substantial amount of waste. There's a bin store that risks overspillage as it's nowhere near the collection point, and a robust management plan hasn't been offered. We've got concerns about smell and vermin along our boundary. To conclude, the plans offer no material improvement from the previous application. 4 flats were rejected on the sound basis of being out of character, over dominant and with insufficient parking. An 8-bed HMO still has all of these shortcomings which completely apply. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
And the second speaker is Georgina McEwen, and there is a written statement which my colleague is going to read out.
First and foremost, the safeguarding of children must be a primary consideration in any planning decision involving land opposite to a school. An HMO, by its nature, involves a high turnover of adult occupants, many of whom will not be long-term residents and therefore not integrated into the community or subject to natural informal oversight. This HMO will directly overlook the reception playground and also be able to watch the Key Stage 2 playground. This unpredictability conflicts with the secure environment that the school strives to maintain. The proposal has not demonstrated any safeguarding assessment. Secondly, the increase in traffic movements and parking pressures generated by an HMO will worsen an already congested area. The school experiences heavy pedestrian and vehicular activity during drop-off and pickup times. Due to the dangers, the school is currently running school streets backed by BCP, meaning directly outside the front door of the HMO, and where the allocated parking spot cannot be accessed during peak school times. This leads to further congestion on other roads. Additional cars linked to HMO residents, visitors, and service vehicles will increase the likelihood of collisions or near misses, particularly involving young children who are among the most vulnerable road users. The proposed parking provision is inadequate, raising the likelihood of overspill parking on pavements, junctions, or school access routes. I am a parent of a child at St. Walburgers. This proposal completely contradicts the aims of school streets, and the inconsistency has angered and caused deep concern for many parents, the PTA, the head teacher, and Board of Governors. Please reject the plans.
And speaking in support, we have Matt Annan.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, members. I'm here speaking in support of this application on behalf of the applicant. To recap, my client's application seeks planning permission to convert the existing C3 dwelling house into an HMO for up to 8 residents with associated works, including formation of cycle and bin stores. The application has been recommended approval by your officers, and I wish to outline the main considerations why I feel members should proceed to grant full planning permission in line with the recommendation. In terms of the principle, Policy CS24 of the Bournemouth Core Strategy deals with houses in multiple occupation. It states that changes of use from Class C3 to HMO will only be permitted where no more than 10% of dwellings in the area adjacent to the property are within use Class C4 or larger sui generis HMO use. When assessing the proposal in line with this policy, your planning officer found that there is only one property out of 61 residential properties within 100 metres radius of the application site that falls within an HMO use. The proposal would increase the number to 2 HMO properties out of 61, which would equate to 3.2% of the area's housing stock. This is comfortably below the 10% limit imposed by policy CS24. Accordingly, the proposal is compliant with the development plan. It is acknowledged that local residents nonetheless have concerns about the impact of the HMO residents, specifically on the locality. The applicant would like to assure the committee that the proposed HMO would be finished to a very high standard and will be managed by a specialist letting agent in accordance with the HMO management plan, which has been provided. The HMO would be marketed at local working professionals looking for accommodation. It is important to acknowledge that this is a valuable form of residential accommodation, which can provide a key step on the housing ladder for many young people as they try to save for deposits. The HMO would not be a student let. This is not an area known for its popularity with the area's student population, as evidenced by the lack of existing HMOs, who tend to live within the town centre and areas such as Winton and Springbourne. The existing property is a good sized attached dwelling with plenty of garden space for the proposed residents on a corner plot. The proposal has been designed to a good standard with rooms well above the minimum standards and excellent communal facilities. Whilst we're aware of local concerns regarding parking, it must be noted that no objection has been raised by the Council's Highways Officer, and of course parking, including cycle parking, has been provided fully in line with the Council's parking standard. We understand the local residents' concern about parking and particular issues from the nearby school. However, it's noted the roads around the school are protected by yellow lines, and with the proposal meeting the Council's own parking standards, there's no reason to suppose the proposal will exacerbate existing problems. In conclusion, the development would help the Council to meet its housing need by contributing to a mix of housing types, including the need to provide HMO accommodation for workers seeking short and long-term accommodation. As evidenced with the officer's report, this can be achieved without causing harm to the character of the area and neighbouring amenities. Accordingly, I hope you agree with your officer's recommendation to grant permission and vote in favour of approval today. Thank you for listening.
And we have Ward Councillor Kate Salmon.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak to you about this application. The application before you proposes the conversion of a modest 3-bedroom family home to a large 8-person HMO. An HMO of this size is considered sui generis. In other words, it is considered to fall outside of normal categorisations. It is by definition considered exceptional on account of its size. The core strategy contains a policy, CS19, that exists explicitly to protect small family dwelling houses, which it describes as often having 3 bedrooms, for which there is a significant demand. This particular small family home is located in close proximity to 4 local schools, with a further 3 also within reasonable walking distance. It is clearly in an ideal location for families with school-aged children, and indeed the housing need in this part of Moordown is overwhelmingly for just such families. The loss of a family home in this location is therefore more than usually problematic, given the specific local context. You'll note from the report that the original property is fractionally larger than the threshold given within the core strategy as a definition of a small family dwelling house, which is 140 metres squared. The property measures 146 metres squared, exceeding the threshold by just 6 metres squared. That's about the size of a modest family bathroom. The application has therefore been considered as technically compliant with CS19. However, applications like this one tend to come to committee because there is a need for nuanced consideration or a fine balance. In this case, there have been 90 objections registered from the community. Now, for those of you not so familiar with Moordown, we're a pretty easygoing bunch most of the time. Very few, if any, planning applications in our area attract this sort of response. The sheer volume of concern being expressed by local residents really should give you some indication of how this application just doesn't sit right in this context. You've heard too from the case officer that the previous application on this site was to convert the property into 4 flats. That was refused on the grounds that it would constitute overdevelopment and would be out of character with the local area. The officer's report on the previous application noted that where subdivisions have occurred in nearby comparable sized properties, the dwellings are separated into 2 flats, which is considered to be acceptable level of use to the dwelling. However, rather than heed this advice and subdivide the house into 2 flats, the applicant has instead returned with this proposal. So instead of a family of probably 2 adults and 2, maybe maximum 3 children, this large HMO will accommodate 8 adults. That is a very significant difference in terms of the use of the property, and that difference will undoubtedly be noticeable to all those living nearby. I'd ask the committee to carefully consider the specific local context of this proposal, with its significantly heightened need for family homes, and the very marginal nature of the measurements by which it's been determined as compliant with policy CS19, and also to consider the very obvious strength of feeling of the local community around this development. I know you have to assess an application on its own merits, but I would ask you to bear in mind that there are several other more reasonable options available to the developer on this site, including the provision of 2 adequately sized flats, or indeed a smaller and more standard HMO for up to 6 people. Overall, the feel of this application is that of maximising profitability at the expense of local amenity. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Ms Sims, did you want to come back on anything which has been mentioned, in particular maybe about the position of the bins and parking?
Yes, so as I said, highways have been consulted and they deem no objection to the position of the parking, the cycle store or the bin store. There'd be sufficient visibility from the parking space. The parking standards SPD does only require 1 parking space per HMO. So in that regard, the application does meet policy standards. The internal layout of the cycle store has not yet been provided, which will be conditioned to be provided just to ensure that there are enough cycle stores to promote sustainable travel. In terms of waste, were also consulted and they were happy with the amount of bins provided. So in terms of that objection, policy complies and the appropriate parties were consulted for that.
Okay, thank you for that. So I'll open up to questions. Councillor Gillett.
So I just need to try and understand this. It seems that when this was sort of assessed previously, and it was flats, it was sort of showing us an over concentration. But this time it seems to have been assessed under Article 4 in a sense, in terms of the concentration. But why wouldn't it be an over concentration just in the sense that it's got too many people living on the site? What can you just determine why it's not an over concentration now, but it was when it was going to be 4 flats?
Sorry. Yeah, of course. So in terms of the flats, the over intensification of use was just one reason for refusal. If I just quickly go, where's my mouse? If I just quickly go back to the slide, the alterations were also out of character, were over dominant to the street scene and created a harmful horizontal emphasis. So they also formed part of the reason for refusal. They also weren't able to provide sufficient parking for 4 flats, whereas a HMO only requires 1 parking space. So it was amongst other reasons, but in regard to 8 bedrooms not being over intensified, it's a different kind of use. It would act as one family dwelling almost, in terms of the way the house will function, rather than 4 independent homes. So in terms of the characteristic of a HMO, it is more in keeping with the area of a traditional residential street, and 8 bedrooms isn't considered to be excessive in this area. All are provided with enough space, and it wouldn't be an over intensification of the plot.
Councillor Gillett, do you want to?
I'm probably being really daft, but it's still like 8. It's still the same. So you only need one reason to refuse planning. So there might be another reason. We can forget all those. Just shove those in the bin for the moment. One of the reasons was over intensification, and it seems to have the same amount of intensification on this, and the intensification seems to be measured against Article 4, which is sort of a different thing about how many things there are in a road. And does that make sense? So we've still got that over in. Have we not still got that over? It was a reason before. Do you think maybe the reason was wrong before? I don't know.
I don't think the reason was wrong before. 4 flats creates a lot more people, a lot more traffic, a lot more comings and goings than an 8 bedroom HMO. It's been specified as individual, so it'll be 8 people within the property, rather than potentially 2 to 3 per flat. So it would be obviously 2 people per flat. In a 4 flat, it would only be 8, but still, if there were 3 or more, the intensification would be more, and there'll be more cars, more comings and goings, and it just couldn't comply with policy, and that was another reason for it as well.
Okay, thank you. Just on, you mentioned 85 Chelmsford Avenue is also an HMO. Have we had any ASB complaints on that?
It's number 89, sorry. And yeah, I approached the housing team, and there have been no reports of antisocial behaviour at 89 Chelmsford Avenue.
Thank you. And in the addendum was the management plan for the property. Is it the same company, or you're not aware?
That wasn't able to be confirmed.
Right, okay.
I couldn't find
But
out.
again, is this a standard, an agreement, obviously the day-to-day management and talking about the tenant selection? Is that, you've seen that type of thing before?
Yeah, it's pretty standard of a HMO management scheme. It's specified for young professionals, so yeah, it's pretty standard of what I've seen before in terms of HMOs.
Thank you. Councillor Pedderman?
Thank you. Can I just get confirmation that were we to approve this, it would still have to go through the licensing regime because it's more than 6 or more than 5, whatever it is, residents, because of the large number? Is that? I think that's correct, is it not?
Yeah, I think it is. I'll defer to Mr. Gould.
Yes, that's correct, Councillor. Yeah, because of the size and the number of people that would be residing in the property.
Okay. Councillor Rice?
Councillor Salmon raised an issue about it being of exceptional size compared with a normal HMO. Can you just go into that a little bit more and explain if there's any planning issues?
Yeah, so it's, in terms of that comment, it was generally HMOs are kind of the 6 bedroom size in terms of being still classed under four, whereas this is an 8 bedroom, so it's classed as its own as sui generis. So it's just a slightly larger HMO. It's in my assessment, I wouldn't consider it to be excessively large for the area. we can have larger HMOs than 8 bedrooms. So yeah, in my assessment of the site, I wouldn't call it exceptionally large. It's just technically falls under a different class than a 6-bedroom HMO.
And another one from me. Obviously, you mentioned obviously the position near the school. Are there any other safeguarding measures you look at in respect of planning?
In respect of planning, the main things we look for are harmful overlooking, overdevelopment. In terms of the school, there is sufficient spacing between the school and the site. As I said within my presentation, historic use at first floor level within a dwelling will be bedrooms. This is to remain, so the level of overlooking towards that school wouldn't increase as the use of the room still remains the same. So in terms of my planning assessment, that's as far as safeguarding almost goes.
Okay, thanks for that. So if there's no further questions, Councillor Canavan?
Yeah, you'll have to forgive me if I'm missing it, but you mentioned in your report that the internal decoration, the internal configuration of this property was going to be conditioned. Is that did I understand that correctly? Because I can't see that. How are you going to control the internal configuration of this building?
Yeah, no, so the internal configuration isn't going to be conditioned. It's the internal layout of the cycle store that's being conditioned to ensure that we've got enough cycle spaces within for the property to be functional. And in terms of the internal layout, that is partially covered under the approved plans condition, and that they have to build to those specifications, as that is what the approval allows them to do.
Sorry, I'm probably being a bit dim, but where are those details of that internal configuration?
It should be within the report as a condition. We don't have it yet, so they'll need to provide the layout of cycle stores.
I'm not specifically talking about the cycle stores because I've understood what you said about that. I'm talking about the internal configuration of the house, what that is going to be divided for the occupancy of 8 people apparently. How is it going to be reconfigured internally, or is it going to be reconfigured internally?
So as you can see on the right hand side, that is the proposed floor plans. So that's how it will be configured internally. So you've got a kitchen living room to the front and a small utility. And then you've got 3 bedrooms with personal en-suites downstairs, 4 upstairs, and then 1 in the roof space. And that will be not conditioned, but it will be part of the approved plans if it is approved. So this is how they would have to build out their scheme.
Can you give the page number on the report as to where those drawings are? I did have it a moment ago to share it, but I've lost it now.
Yeah, so it would be, if you're looking on the online, as Councillor Salmon said, 3, if you're 103, if you're looking at the intranet, then it would be as one of the attachments to the report. We'll just take a time.
It's the PDF titled HMO layout C (4).
And just looking at the CS19, so as your report says, and as we heard, we're talking about a 6 square metre difference between the threshold, as it were. Is that enough to warrant that? Yeah, you can discard that policy, or it's that type of you set these policies and that's it.
Yeah. The policy does specifically set out the space standards of, I can't get it up quick enough, 140 metres squared. Thank you. 140 metres squared. So that is what we stick to. In terms of change of use to a HMO, it's still remaining as one residential property. It's not a complete loss of the site as it would be if it were flats. But of course, when considering that, it doesn't comply with that policy as it is a slightly larger home.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Callaghan, did you want to come back, or you? Okay. Okay, so if we move into debate now then, please. Obviously, as we've just heard, it is a conversion of a house to allow 8 young people to live in a property, but appreciating that it's probably one of the highest amount of 90 people objecting to it, and the balance of a position, as we've heard from the ward councillor, do make it a balanced decision, which we appreciate some input. No. Okay. Councillor Gillett.
So I'm concerned that that we haven't completely answered this sort of intensification issue. You know, when it was looked at before, you had 4 flats. I say through a company I manage, we rent out a number of flats actually in Surrey, but a lot of them are 2 beds, and quite often there's only 1 car per household. You know, with a couple of people, and when you think about it's like a professional HMO, which is essentially what's being constructed here. These are generally people that are sort of forced down from sort of 1 beds into an HMO because of the rental increases over the last few years, and generally they're going to be folk that work at JP Morgan and things like that. They're going to essentially they're all going to have cars, and so I almost see it's almost more intense potentially than the 4 flats. And one of the reasons for the 4 flats being turned down was intensification. That was just a thought that I'm having.
Mr. Gould.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to sort of come in on this point of intensification that Councillor Gillett's raised a couple of times now. I have over the last few minutes been looking at the reasons for refusal on the previous application, and I can't see any reference in the decision notice to intensification in terms of the number of people. There is, however, reference to the proposal constituting a congested overdevelopment of the site, but that is more in the context of the physical works that were taking place to the property. If I could ask Ms Sims to just put the plan back on the screen from the previously refused application, please. And if you look at could we go to the existing elevations? So if, for example, you look at the proposed elevations and in the top right of the screen, the front elevation, you look at the roof, it's a hipped roof all the way around. And if we could now go to what was then the proposed plan, you can see that the significantly increase in the bulk and the massing of that roof by going from hip to gables on the ends of the building, and then inserting 2 rather large dormers. So that was the reason why words like congested overdevelopment, it was more in relation to that bulk and mass, the additional bulk and mass that was going into the property as a result of that scheme. And just on the point about parking, your parking SPD obviously stipulates that for a HMO of this size, 1 parking space is all that's required. So that's what the policy is saying. There is obviously a material difference between a HMO and a scheme for 4 2-bed flats. 4 2-bed flats in the SPD will obviously generate or says it requires more parking, hence also why that formed one of the reasons for refusal on the previous app. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for confirming that. Okay, clear. Councillor Tarling.
Yeah, just picking up what Councillor Gillett said. Yeah, I agree. The policy, the SPD, probably doesn't follow in this case what we would think the actual happens, but it is the approved policy of this committee. So I'm struggling to find a reason in our planning policies to go against the officer recommendation here. We're not. There's a thing about professionals here, and we hear some of the objectors talking about antisocial behaviour, and antisocial behaviour can come from many quarters. The management plan it is in place. It's up to the landlord to manage that, and they don't want their property damaged any more than anyone else does. And mention of schools. I know you, Mr. Chair, Governor of a school. One of the big problems we have in this area is recruitment of teachers to the school that you're governor of. We've recently had issues there. And one of the things that puts off young teachers coming to teach in our schools is they come here, accept a job, then go and look for somewhere to rent and pretty much withdraw. And that's actually a real case example of happened at one of our local schools. So, you know, I understand some of the feelings of the intensification, but it's a compliant, what looks like I can't see, it isn't a compliant scheme. Yes, 8 seems too many. Yes, 6 would be better. But you know, it meets the criteria that's set out in our policy document. So I can't see any reason to go against the officer recommendation.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Pedro.
Yes, I'm afraid student housing has given HMOs a bad reputation, sometimes rightly, very often wrongly, I suspect. But I think we all in our minds, but certainly I do, tend to equate HMO as a student house. And it's not. It's not. And this is making it clear it's targeting particularly young professionals. But I have heard of people, you know, considerably older than young professionals who, for various reasons, marriage breakup or whatever, are having to live on their own in something affordable and small, and they're living in an HMO. I still am not happy at the proliferation of HMOs in this area. I don't think enough has been done to assess need. But given that we have no statistics on need, unfortunately, I think we're going to see more and more of these. And as long as they're well managed, which often they are, if they're not, obviously, enforcement's got to take place. I'm struggling to find a reason for turning this down. There's virtually no physical change in the building, a dorm, a gable window being put in, but it's not increasing the bulk and the mass over what's existing there. Internally, basically, it's the same layout, no walls, and anyway, internal alterations are not normally a matter for this committee. So I can't see a planning reason to turn this down.
Okay, Councillor Clements.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, following on from what was said by the 2 previous speakers, I agree with everything that they have said, actually. And I have to say, speaking from personal experience, I personally have lived in between 2 HMOs. One was a house full of young men, one was a house full of young women. And actually, they were delightful and they were hardworking, went to work all the time. My only concern is the parking issue, because they all had cars, and in my experience, it was a bit difficult on the road for parking. And I can see that possibly the 1 parking space on this particular property could be a potential difficulty for people. But otherwise, I agree. I can't see any reason why we shouldn't agree with the officer's recommendation.
Okay, thank you for that. Are there any other speakers? So I think from what the speakers have said so far, on planning reasons, there is nothing to refuse it. So I from the chair, will propose as set out, but with a couple of amends just to bolster the a couple of conditions to bolster the management plan. So,
Can you to explain them?
Yeah, Mr. Gould.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Listening to the debate, it reminded me of an application that this committee saw in September on Richmond Park Avenue, which was also for the creation of I can't remember whether it was 7 or 8 person HMO. And in respect of that, members felt the need to bolster the decision by adding conditions around a management plan. Currently, there isn't a condition in the list in the report for a management plan, but there is a management plan that's been submitted, and it's was provided in the addendum update yesterday. So if members were minded to vote to approve the application, they could consider adding a condition to ensure that the use is in operation with the management plan. I had a look at the management plan myself yesterday, and I don't think there's any specific reference to a contact details in there for 24-hour 365 contact details. So again, members might want to consider, if they want to add a management plan, also requiring the current management plan to be bolstered to include contact details. And another condition members might want to consider is, and you did add it to the Richmond Park Avenue, Richmond Park Crescent, sorry, scheme, and that was to specifically limit the maximum number of occupants. Obviously, the application states it's for an 8-person HMO, but there could be a scenario like Ms Sims said where you have couples. So you could add a condition saying something along the line, no more than 8 residents shall occupy the premises at whatever the address is. If members obviously were going to go down that route, then the recommendation affords the chair you the scope to give delegated authority back to the head of planning operations to word up those conditions.
Yeah, so that is my proposal to accept with those additional conditions. Councillor Slade?
In that management plan, it's just a minor note, but in the management plan, it references assured short-hold tenancies. The Renters' Rights Bill, as of the 1st of May, will be assured tenancies. So we can just make sure it's not assured short-hold and it's assured tenancies. And we'll need to deal with that one.
Okay, thank you. That's captured and delegated to the planning. So do I have a seconder? Councillor Tarling, do you want to say anything?
No, I'm happy with the amendments made. Councillor Slade's added things. I know tenancy law is changing, so it needs to reflect future changes.
Okay, thank you. So is there any other debate? Mr. Gould?
Thank you, Chair. Just to, for openness and transparency, to draw members' attention to the end of the report, you'll see probably something you've not seen before. It's called an appropriate assessment form. Because this is an application that proposes residential accommodation, where there's net gain to the town stock, then it has to provide appropriate mitigation in respect of things like heathland protection and now the New Forest SAMs. So just really to, I'm not suggesting a full-on debate around that, but just to get members to acknowledge the fact that they have seen that, because as the decision maker, obviously you're the decision maker, so you have to be satisfied that the scheme will deliver the appropriate mitigation, which is in the form of a legal agreement that will secure financial contributions towards the designated heathlands and the New Forest. Thank you.
Thanks for clarifying that. Okay, so if we're ready to go to a vote, so the proposal is set out to approve. If you vote now.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
To vote, if you're against that proposal.
1, 2, 3.
And I think that's it, isn't it? Okay, so that application is approved as set out. Thank you. So we're now moved to item 6C, which is Royston Manor, and that is Mr. Sanders. Just to say, we are joined by a heritage officer, which the name just Ruth Povey. Thank you. So, when Mr. Sanders is ready. Okay.
Apologies for the delay there. Good morning. This application is for 5 Derby Road, Royston Manor, which is for the installation of a fence with a pedestrian gate. The key The key issues of this application are the impact on the character and appearance of the area. This includes on designated heritage assets, East Cliff Conservation Area and Langley Manor Hotel, the impact on neighbouring residential amenity, the impact on trees, the impact on highways and the impact on B&G. So to introduce the site, these are the block and location plans. As you can see using my cursor, the proposed new fence would be along the boundary here. And here are the site and surroundings of the site. The approximate location of the fence is in the orange dotted line here. The Grade 2 listed building, the red blob, and the application site with the star. And using the right hand picture, you can see the green hatching is the conservation area. Here are the current photographs of the site, looking west to east along Niverton Road. And my cursor is showing the area the fence would be placed. And here is looking east to west, and again, my cursor showing the location of the fence. Here's just the location zoomed out slightly. You can see the application site where my cursor is here, and then a corresponding boundary treatment the other side of the road using a different material. Here are the proposed plans and elevations. The fence would be 1.8 metres high and powder coated green galvanised mesh metal fencing. And as you can see on my cursor, there would be a gate to one side. Here is the proposed, Here is the proposed detailing, just to give you a bit more of an idea of the material finish. And here's some examples of the type of fence. As you can see, this type of fence is something found a bit more at industrial sites or potentially for schools and things like that. So, with regard to the impact of the character and appearance of the area, Roysdean Manor is a positive contributor to the East Cliff Conservation Area. It's opposite a Grade 2 listed building as well, the application site. The existing boundary treatment is hedging in trees. This is in keeping with the open, non-intrusive feel. And the proposed fence is at odds with this. It'd become a prominent feature which is not found elsewhere in the conservation area and would erode the leafy, open feel of the street. There are also less harmful options available in terms of design and materials, such as a wood fence, which could be found on the opposite side of the road. Informal advice was offered by the heritage officer, recommending using an alternative material such as a wooded design, which could be less harmful than the design proposed. In terms of the harm to the assets, this would be contrary to policy CS39 and CS41, as well as policy 4.4. The heritage officer decided there was less than substantial harm, which would be caused to the conservation area and listed building. And paragraph 215 of the MPPF states, where a development proposal would lead to less than substantial harm to the significance of a designated heritage asset, this harm should be weighed against the public benefits of the proposal, including, where appropriate, securing its optimum viable use. So when we look at public benefit, there would be a creation of a visual barrier to persons seeking to engage in antisocial behaviour within the curtilage, which is a concern raised by the applicant. However, there is a failure to create a physical barrier and therefore not of sufficient public benefit to outweigh the less than substantial harm caused. If you look at the picture up here, you can see the approximate location of the fence in orange, and you can see as you turn the corner from the fence, the frontage of the site is very open, very easy to access. And again, just showing the approximate location of the fence, and then as you walk around this corner, the site is very easy to access. Impact on neighbouring residential amenity. There are concerns regarding the security of the building currently, and antisocial behaviour has been raised. The fence would provide some additional security as a visible deterrent from trespassers. However, as per the reasons raised under public benefits, this would not be effective due to the retention of other ways to enter the site. And in general, the fence would not impact the neighbouring amenity of surrounding properties. In terms of impact on trees, there is no objection, subject to adherence to an arboricultural method statement and tree protection plan. And the tree officer also provided informal advice where if a different material fence, such as a wooden one, was used, and it was the same height and post positions as the currently submitted one, that no new plans would need to be submitted. That would raise issue with the tree officer specifically. And there is no objection from highways. So the recommendation is to refuse the application due to poor design, out of keeping of the street scene, and unjustified harm to the character and appearance of the conservation area and the setting of the adjacent listed building. In summary, there is harm to the character and appearance of the conservation area. There is less than substantial harm, but this is not outweighed by public benefits, and there is acceptable impacts on neighbouring residential amenity, trees, highways, and B&G. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sanders, for the presentation. If we now have speakers.
Thank you, Chair. So we have no registered objectors. We do have Dominic Barnes, who wishes to speak on behalf of Roysdean Manor residents. Dominic is joining us online. Hi, Dominic. Can
everybody hear me okay?
We can hear you loud and clear. So
Thank you
whenever
very much.
you're ready.
I'll begin. Thank you. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for allowing me to speak on behalf of the residents of Roysdean Manor. We're here because we urgently need a safe and secure boundary. Our current boundary to our back garden is very open. For several years, our gardens and hedgerow areas have been repeatedly used for serious antisocial behaviour. We routinely find discarded needles, drug paraphernalia, condoms, wrappers, human waste, rubbish including large household items, sold nappies among the trees and shrubs that are situated on our border. We have bicycle thefts from our back gardens, and we've had violent incidents directly outside our property, including knife crime in Derby Road and assault just outside our property this summer. These issues have made many of us feel unsafe in our own homes. The worry constantly about our children or grandchildren using the garden and the very real chance that they pick up infected needles or harmful material. At present, the garden, which should support well-being and community, is frequently unsafe to use. Only last week, we had to ask a man sitting in the bushes in the rear of our garden to move. This is clearly a safeguarding issue for our community, and we feel that our children are unable to play safely in the garden due to the open boundary. Our application, as said, is proposing an 8.1 metre green powdered coat fence, which matching pedestrian gate, as pictured in picture 1. The height is domestic, the appearance is subdued, and the colour chosen to blend naturally with the surrounding planting. All important trees are retained, as well as existing plants and shrubs. The tree officer has confirmed no objections, provided the trees remain protected measures are followed. We've also included a number of hedgehog cross access points to maintain wildlife movement. There are no neighbour objections to this application, and the only objections relates to heritage design. The heritage officer detailed the proposal fencing is unacceptable as its location would be adjacent and running along the pavement edge, which would not be the case as we propose for it to be set within the boundary of our property to encourage plant growth. The tree officer and highways detailed in the report that there are no objections as the fence is set into the grounds and as such would not affect the pavement edge. The heritage officer has suggested a closed wooden fence similar to the one at 3 Derby Road. However, we feel that fencing is visually harsh and will create a solid blank frontage, blocks the growth of greenery and offers no wildlife access. Additionally, it would be susceptible to graffiti, which is a prevalent issue in this area. In our view, this would be more harmful to the character of the conservation area and then to the open green fence would we propose. By contrast, the style of green metal fence we're proposing is already widely used by properties that border the upper and middle Bournemouth Gardens. The gardens are a Grade 2 listed on the National Heritage Register, have won Green Flag Awards every year since 1999, and are bordered by several properties whose green metal boundary fence allows hedging planting to grow through, creating a soft, natural conservation-friendly approach, as shown in pictures 2 and 3. This demonstrates clearly this style of fencing is already considered acceptable and visually appropriate in the context of highly sensitive historical landscape setting immediately adjacent to a listed gardens. We've also would like to draw to the committee's attention that the fact that the same style of green fencing is used in Burton Road next to local listed building. This shows such fencing is not out of character in the conservation area across the wider BCP area. To be clear, we are not trying to go against policy, and we are not asking for industrial or intrusive solution. We're asking you to use the boundary treatment that is already successfully used in conservation settings throughout Bournemouth, precisely because it allows greenery to soften and blend the boundary in a way that a solid timber fence can't. The public benefit of this proposal are significant. The fence will improve safety, reduce antisocial behaviour, create a clear and appropriate boundary, protect vulnerable residents, and support local biodiversity. For those reasons, we respectfully ask the committee to consider the genuine safety needs of residents and the clear heritage precedents already present in the town, and to approve the application. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Dominic. Moving on, we have Ward Councillor here, Councillor Sarah Armstrong. Would you like to come forward whenever you're ready?
Thank you, Chair, members, for giving me the opportunity to speak. For over a year, I've worked very closely with the residents of Rosedene Manor on Derby Road. Their building, it's not just a building, it is a really vital piece of East Cliff's heritage, and it's cared for with dedication and pride by those who live within it. And if you've visited the site, which I hope that you have, you will have seen the effort that goes into preserving its unique character and beauty. I also want to echo the words of my resident Dominic. The report, it states that the fence and the gate should be refused because it is detrimental to the conservation area. Well, I'm very concerned to hear this, because if this is found to be the case, then we will need to review the whole of the application of, this type of policy in relation to Grade 2 listed areas, which we have one in Bournemouth, which is certainly not an industrial area. The green fencing proposed for this application is the exact same type, actually, that BCP Council uses in the Upper and Lower Bournemouth Gardens, and they've won awards, they're green flag winners for years. These gardens run for 3 kilometres from Bournemouth Pier to Poole, and they're part of the Bourne Valley Greenway. And the fencing there blends in with the greenery, and over time it's softened and it's created a verdant, conservation-friendly boundary. So if it can work in our town centre, in our beautiful Grade 2 listed gardens, it can work for us also at Rosedene Manor. It should be mirroring the best practice and aligning with BCP's own strategy for green fencing in heritage settings. I was going to say a bit about the timeline of this, but I think it's more important that I focus on why this fence should be approved. As we've already heard, there are no harms to the trees as long as the residents work according to the plan, and it complies with the BS, British standards. And I understand that there are no trees that are under tree protection orders that will be close to the fence line. This is another point I'd like to really emphasise, is that it's an eco-friendly and sustainable option because it's green powder coating. That coating emits no volatile organic compounds, which are very detrimental to the environment. And unlike the wooden fencing, do not require chemical treatments and repainting. Wooden fences often attract graffiti, and there are many examples of this across the whole of the conservation area. It will naturally integrate the natural integration within 6 to 12 months. The native hedging that will remain there and the tree canopies will soften the structure and blend into the conservation area. I'd also like to highlight the biodiversity net gain because the proposal will be maintaining and protecting the native species, and which will then support the wildlife corridors and pollinators. And the design has specifically been made to be hedgehog friendly. It's aesthetic and heritage friendly too, given that it's set back from the pavement and it will be softened by the foliage, and it's using a proven product found in many Grade 2 listed gardens. There have been no objections from any of the neighbours, including those who have an interest in listed buildings in the area. And this tells me that there isn't really any strength of feeling here at all about it in the area. There have also been no objections from highways or harm identified by the tree reports. And it will provide enhanced security as it will complement the existing CCTV that is at the front of the building and the planting that has been done also at the front of the building to reduce antisocial behaviour and safeguard families. So this isn't about creating, it's not just about a fence. It's about creating a safe and sustainable, respectful environment for residents whilst preserving the character of the conservation area. And it's also about the application of consistency in how we apply our planning guidance. After more than a year of delays and unnecessary hurdles, I urge the committee to approve this application and allow these residents to enjoy the security and quality of life and enjoy their own back garden like they deserve to. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Mr. Sanders or Ms. Povey, did you want to come back on anything what's been said, maybe about consistency, like the lower gardens? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to quickly clarify the location of the fence because it came up in both rounds of speaking. We can obviously only go by the submitted plans, and just to clarify, the location of the fence is put along here in the highway in the block and location plan, and then in the submitted plans and elevations you can see the black line at the top going what appears to look alongside the highway. Thank you, Chair. I defer to the Heritage Officer.
Yeah, good morning. Yeah, I'll just follow up on a few points. There was mention raised about the council installing this sort of fencing in the gardens and it being characteristic of the gardens. I mean, I can think of fencing surrounding the tennis courts. There's quite high fencing there. But generally in the gardens, yes, there's the use of green, but the low metal railings. I'm not aware, other than the photograph that was shown earlier, where a householder puts a low type of this fence on top of a wall there. I'm not aware that this is a sort of something characteristic of the registered gardens or a type of fence that the council's encouraging in that location.
Okay, thank you for that. So, Councillor, questions then, please. Councillor Tarling?
Yeah, I'm not overly clear. There was a mention about the fences set back from the back of the pavement. Do we know what that offset is? I couldn't work it out from the plans.
I'm not entirely sure of the distance. That is not a figure I have to hand. However, if you go by the light grey being the highway, you can see the footway, the gate to the right hand side. Just here, it appears to be along the boundary there. But as you can see from the bottom picture elevation, there is a tree sited in front of it. So it is particularly challenging to see exactly where it would go.
Yeah, if I can just try and assist members. Looking at the drawing that George has got on the screen, the plan at the top, towards the left-hand side, you'll see that there's annotated an electricity box, and the fence sits immediately behind that. That electricity box, I'm looking at Google Street Scene as we speak, is immediately on the back of the footpath. So the fence will be immediately behind that electricity box. So I think it's reasonable to say it's adjacent to the footpath.
Thanks. Councillor Tulling?
Yeah, I mean, that's great. I mean, it would have been nice. That's useful having there, but it doesn't show that quite clearly, and where you can see that the detritus has come over from the, you know, the trees and ivy, that the footpath might be actually back a ways from there. It is normal to put a street cabinet on the back of the curb, and you're quite right. So if that's set back, that would be 300 millimeters or a foot from the back of that curb edge. Was there any planting plan associated with the fence at all submitted?
There was a tree protection plan and arboricultural method statement submitted, which outlined there would be no impacts on the trees, but I didn't see anything particular about planting. Sorry, I'd have to recheck that, however, though, so if you give me 2 minutes, I can have a quick look.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions while that's being looked into? Just for me, Miss Povey, so obviously you're talking about the materials used. Is the height also an issue for you, or could that material be used if it was a lower? Would that be a consideration for you? Thanks.
I don't think lowering the height would mitigate my concerns. It's the design and the material itself, gives that overall appearance that just isn't in keeping in this locality. Yeah, as I've tried to say all along, it's not an objection to the principle, just is this the right solution here? That's been my approach.
Because again, I go along the main road and then obviously ducked in to see this, and as with a lot of wood, 6 foot, 1.8 meter wood paneling, if they need to be replaced, I'm looking at one on Google Maps where there's a lighter panel against all the darker, so that really stands out. And as we've heard from councillors and others, that with graffiti, that obviously is a smear to that. So how do you balance those types of things?
Yeah, if I could come in on that. I mean, the example across the road in the photo on the left, you've got a fence. It's slightly lower than 6 foot. It is a bit lower, and I think that, you know, something like that would be appropriate characteristic. I don't see it covered in graffiti. I would always ask that somebody stains a fence, perhaps gives it a slightly darker colour, help it fit in. Yeah, that would be my response.
But just going back, so obviously in the heritage area, so the fence that I'm looking along, just along the other, towards the other roundabout along this stretch of Derby Road, it hasn't been maintained, so it's not stained. Well, it probably was stained 10 years ago, but it's not. So it's fading in different colours. Panels have been replaced, which again are different colours. And it just doesn't look. So I'm just really trying to get out about, yes, in an ideal world, that, as you said, that picture of the fence we're looking at now, because it's been maintained and it's low and it's not graffiti, it looks good. But there's many cases which we've all seen around our area where it doesn't look like that because the wood's of a different colour, or panels of a different colour, and it has had graffiti. And it's just trying to understand, well, yes, you're trying to protect the conservation area, but life happens, and it's not always so uniform.
Well, I think it's about the starting point. I mean, fences, yeah, they do develop a patina. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It's that natural material. Yeah, and they do need maintenance, as properties do, the boundary treatment does. But for me, the starting point is what is characteristic of that area, that natural wood material, rather than introducing something which isn't characteristic of the area and is more expected, say, surrounding schools or industrial sites. So that would be my response.
Thank you. Councillor Timmins.
Thanks, Chair. Just a question, please, to the planning officer. The photograph that you showed us of that green, almost like military looking fence that you said was the type of fencing that would be used. Is that actually 100% a clear representation of what's proposed? Because the fencing that we saw in the photograph that the resident showed, it looked quite different and quite, that looks more delicate and within keeping of the planting than that thing that you showed us.
The photo earlier on in the slide was just an example found elsewhere. It wasn't particular to this. This was evidence provided by the applicant for the fence they wish to use. However, I would say it is obviously very different. It's a lot smaller. I'm not sure how the fence structure would change as you made it bigger, but that's the example they provided, and then I've just provided a counterpoint, I guess.
Thank you, because that looks a lot more acceptable to me than the thing that you showed us, which looked like it belonged in a military camp somewhere.
The fence they've proposed is a 1.8 metre high fence. That is not 1.8 metre high, so it was more to provide something in line with the height and scale, I would say.
I'm looking more at like the density of it, you know, the structure.
Gauge.
Yes, that's the word. Thank you.
I would suggest this elevation gives a slightly better indication of gauge. I admittedly have not checked that gauge against the examples I provided. Again, it was just to provide more of a height massing kind of example, I guess. However, there's some technical more details of the gauge and the specifics of the design up there now.
Okay, Councillor Tarling.
This isn't a question, but it's an answer to the question. I have installed or project managed installations of probably many hundreds of miles of this fence on military establishments and on schools. It is the same fencing whether it's a military establishment or school. The only difference on the school is sometimes you use bright blue or bright red or stuff like that to make it more cheerful. That is a very standard V-mesh fence gauge. It is more robust. The one that they're proposing to put in there, looking at the spacing, it will be more robust than the one that was shown in the image of Lower Bournemouth Gardens. And it will be a straight wire. It isn't a crinkle wire that was in the image we saw at Bournemouth Gardens. So it is slightly more heavy duty, but it is, yeah, we'll come on to the debate in a minute.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Summon, did you indicate?
Yeah, sorry, I'm going to carry on this gauge business. Can we clarify if anywhere in the report gauge is actually specified? Because I can't see it on that plan. I can see pictures and I can see measurements around like bolts and height and width of fence, but I can't see anything about that. What we're actually talking about. That, you know, we've seen a photo of a fence with much thinner bits of it, and we've seen the photo of the in a different context of that taller fence, and I think we need more clarity about which of those we're actually talking about in this application.
Sanders.
I'm just checking now. I'm not sure the applicant provided of the specific detail of that. They only provided examples of it used elsewhere, and as said, we've gone and found our own evidence. I'll just double check while this is going on, but I don't believe so.
Councillor Canavan.
Thank you, Chair. So my question really is, would it be possible to condition acceptance of this application on you know, with some satisfactory reassurance about exactly what sort of fence this is, because I can't tell what that is from this diagram. And there certainly are fences that are available, not necessarily of that height, but there are other fences around Bournemouth that are open and that allow foliage to grow through like this. So that's one question. The other thing that seems to be slightly in question is the degree to which this is set back from the footpath. You know, we're probably talking matters of inches, I guess. But so my questions are: could we condition it on the basis that we are clear about the gauge and the type of fencing this is and the distance it is from the footpath? That's my question. I mean, I would have to say, when probably not appropriate to comment on now, but I would have a view about a solid wooden fence. That's for sure.
Okay, Mr. Sanders, did you have anything to come back on the gauge? Did you find anything in your?
Cannot find anything specific, so it was just the case of nothing was provided beyond, as you can see, this detailing screen's probably the closest we'll get to that. And just to reply to the earlier point about the planting plans, there is nothing submitted either with regard to that.
And then also about, so we saw the diagram about, and the electricity box about the actual positioning of it. So if we did go that, the question was about conditions, so you could specify a distance from, you're talking about the edge of the pavement? Okay, we could specify that. Okay, Councillor Rice?
It was a comment rather than a question. Are we on to comment?
No, if there's no further questions, no, so yeah, Councillor Rice.
I think for me, I can appreciate the benefits of having light being able to travel through the fence as opposed to a solid wood one, but I can also appreciate the height of it is quite bulky, and it's not a particularly pretty looking fence, but I can appreciate sort of the ambition that once the planting has grown through, that it almost disappears. However, I think I'm sort of the impression that conditions we don't know enough about what planting is already existing there to be able to say, let's condition it sort of in the middle of the planting that's there, because we don't know what trees, trunks are there that are going to limit where it can actually be. So I think it just needs a little bit of work. But for me, I'm sort of supportive of the idea of having something there. If it could just come back again in the future with a fence which is more in keeping with the heritage officer, and maybe not so high.
I can't remember where it was. Must be under the tree section, but the tree officer I thought did make a comment that the position of the posts were acceptable if it was wood. So the post position weren't going to damage trees or.
Yeah, but that's
structures.
where it is on the plans, as opposed to the suggestion that it's set back, which is also what the applicant was saying, or one of the representations was that it was going to be set back, but that's different from what we've been shown in the plans. So I didn't think we could condition it to be set back, because the tree officer hasn't looked at it being set back, if you know what I mean.
Okay, Councillor Tarling.
Yeah, I've had a look at all the standard VMesh gauges, and the standard for a standard VMesh gauge is a 5mm wire construction, and that is a fairly normal, or 6 gauge as it's called, but so it's a fairly standard size. My question about the planting, I'll address the first point, and that's this substantial harm, and no substantial harm is being created, and a fence is pretty much a temporary structure. You know, we're not talking about building a stone wall or something like this that's going to be standing for hundreds of years. The lifespan of a V-mesh fence is sort of about 20 years, so there's no permanent damage to the environment here. When we talk about conservation area, and you know, I've lived in this area most of my life, and you ask what Derby Road and Niverton Road is known for, you know, it is actually not for its wonderful broad leafy line streets. It has a much different reputation, and I would completely agree with the residents' point. I think by creating that barrier to stop nefarious use of the margins of their gardens for people up to no good, I think outweighs the potential non-substantial harm to the environment. And the reason for asking about the planting is that the planting behind that fence, as you can see on the image of the screen at the moment, is actually already quite high and above the level of that fence. So the effect of it catching the eye is not considerable. If it was an open field, I think you would spot it, and it would be quite intrusive. But I think against a green fence, against a green background, it you won't notice it after a year or so. I would happily recommend approval of this. I think it adds additional security to the rear of the property. They haven't brought it around the front of the property, so the amenity and the sort of curtilage of the building isn't impacted negatively, and the joy and the benefit amenity of the building to other residents is still preserved, and there's a selection of fences along there. I take very seriously the point of graffiti. I can't comment. I haven't really seen what the graffiti is. We see a little bit of graffiti on the street cabinet. So it happens in that area. Whether that would happen on a timber fence or not, I don't know. A comment was made about the fact that this fence doesn't need any treatment. A timber fence, in theory, every 3 to 5 years would need a treatment of a product which probably has VOCs on it, and therefore it is more environmentally sound. So I'm going to propose that we accept the planning application, but with the amendment of a condition, if possible, that the applicant submits a planting plan in association with this, and we'll delegate this to to our planning department, head of planning, that a planting plan is submitted alongside to reinstate this green feel that they wish to encounter, and they may wish to put some interesting stuff like pyracantha and hollies along there if they really want to stop it. Nobody's going to get through a hedge of pyracantha, I promise you, or hollies just to boost it up. And I think that would I'm not going to lead them what plants they need to plant, but it would actually give that soft feel which they're looking to do. And I think if we had a planting strategy with this, and again, would actually create the effect that they're saying they wish to create. Thank you. So I've made a proposal.
So Mr. Gould, is there see the part about specifying the planting? Yeah, is that something
that can be done? Yeah. Yes, if there is going to be a move to support the application, which is obviously contrary to the officer's recommendation, then members would need to identify the material planning reasons as to why they feel the scheme is acceptable, identify relevant policies from the local plan, and again, they could add conditions. And if I'm understanding correctly, what Councillor Tarling is saying is that an additional condition relating to a scheme of planting to be submitted and approved in writing by the local planning authority to help the vegetation soften the impact of the fence in the conservation area.
okay? Thanks for confirming that. So, Councillor, well, first of all, do we have a seconder? So, Councillor Clements has seconded it, and Councillor Tarling, do you just want to, because obviously I think it's 17 is where we're saying about, so less than substantial harm to the designated asset has been, which needs to be weighed against the public benefit. So you're talking about the public safety. Is there any other things you wanted to expand on?
No, I think that's it. The statement makes that it's less than substantial harm, and the reason why it's before us as a committee is because it's in the balance. It's a discussion of balance. What's the impact on heritage against the safety of the residents and the safe use of their facility.
Mr. Gould was talking about policies.
Yeah.
So what are you looking for us to identify there?
I'll try and help then, Chair, if I may. So starting with the planning reasons, and again, I hope I'm not putting words into councillors' mouths here, but listening to the debate, it seems that those Councillor Tarling, who's proposing the move to support the application, is saying that in terms of the visual impact of the proposed fence, in terms of impact on the street scene, impact on the character and appearance of the conservation area, is acceptable, because of the open nature of the fence and the fact that over time it will integrate with the vegetation. There hasn't been any talk so far about the impact on the listed building, which is just around the corner. So I'd welcome maybe a comment on that. In terms of policy, there's two main policies that deal with this proposal. So from the core strategy, you've got the policy CS39, which is specifically related to designated heritage assets. Designated heritage assets being, amongst other things, conservation areas and listed buildings. And you've also got a saved policy, policy 4.4 from the district-wide local plan 2002, which again is specifically focused on conservation areas. So again, not wanting to put words into the mouths of councillors, but if there is a move to say that the scale and the design and the appearance of the fence is considered acceptable, then members would be suggesting that it complies with policy CS39 of the core strategy and 4.4 of the district-wide local plan. And just briefly, Chair, there's obviously statutory legislation as well, which is the Planning Listed Building Conservation Area Act of 1990. Section 72 specifically deals with conservation areas where the duty is to preserve or enhance. So again, I would conclude that members are saying that they feel the development would preserve or enhance. I'd seek clarification on that. And section 66 of that act deals with the protection of listed buildings and their settings. And again, I'd welcome a bit of comment on that, Chair, but is that helpful?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Tarling.
Yeah, just on the settings, which is very key to a listed building, and I think the fact that the applicant hasn't brought the fence around to the front of the building, it doesn't affect the setting of the building. You cannot see the building, certainly during the summer months when the leaves are on the trees, you cannot see the building through the fence. Neither when you are looking at the frontage of the building will you be able to see this fence once it's grown up. So all of the statements made by the officers regarding the impact, I think the impact is minimal, very minimal on the setting of the heritage area compared to the benefits to the residents of the building, and because of the setting, because where they've set it back from the path, it doesn't come all the way to the frontage of the building. If we've got the plan, the block plan, we just see that again. You know, it starts quite a way back down Nibberton Road. In fact, it doesn't. I'm assuming the dark. Well, yeah. I mean, so the darker grey is the car park area. You know, it's actually set back from the frontage of the building. So from the roundabout, you still have a view of the building without having that fence necessarily in your eye line. So you do have a clear view all the way around of the building. So, you know, it comes down to opinion, and the opinion of a heritage officer against us as members here to weigh in the balance, and I don't accept.
And your comments about, obviously you're focusing about the applicant's side, but obviously on the other side of the roundabout, the listed building, the Lantry Manor, your argument is the same. That
yeah, I can't see it. So, yeah, in my view, anyway, impacting the setting for those listed buildings. But I mean that is my opinion, and we've been asked, members of this committee, our opinion on this. It's the, you know, the officers present the facts as they see them, but they also present them with their views and opinions on something. It doesn't mean that that's right. We are here as elected members to do the best for our communities. If it was a concrete wall 1.8 meters high, and if they painted leaves on it, it would be contrary to the heritage, the setting of the two listed buildings. But it isn't. This is, in my view, quite a benign fence, and especially if we put in some planting around it and let that softening, as the applicant has said, I think you'll get a situation where in a year's time or a year after the installation of it, you actually won't see it at all, and you wouldn't read it differently from just an ordinary planted.
And the other guidance from Mr. Gould, you were in agreement with the policies he quoted, and
Yeah,
direction.
absolutely. But I don't think we're contravening those policies with
Okay.
what we're
And as
suggesting.
seconder, Councillor Clements, do you want to come back in?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I agree 100% with Councillor Tarling. I also think we really do have a duty to consider the health and safety of the residents there. And from what was presented to us from the councillor supporting and the residents supporting this, they're having to put up, it sounds like, an awful lot of unsociable and unpleasant things coming into their gardens. And most certainly, if you had children there or grandchildren visiting or children visiting, you would most definitely want to ensure that they were protected and safe. And the only way it seems to do that in this circumstance is with this type of fencing that's being proposed.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Pedovin, did you want to come in?
Yes. Well, yeah, I agree with a lot of what Councillor Tarling and others have said about that the impact on heritage and all that. My concern is whether this fence is actually going to do what is wanted. If the residents have been suffering from antisocial behaviour, will a fence along a fairly certainly well under half of the length of the perimeter along an area that has already got I don't know what the word is, rather hostile planting. I mean, it's very informal. It's not formal planting, but there's bushes and trees and, it's not the easiest of places to get through. When you've got a wide open 2-vehicle width gateway and very low, that sort of fencing round the corner, I mean, is it going to actually do what's wanted? I don't know.
Okay, Councillor Rice.
Just on that point, there is the CCTV that was mentioned around the front of the property. So I do think that it will make a difference from the antisocial point of view, but I also feel that a 1.2 metre high fence would be equally enough of a deterrent and not so visually intrusive. Just a practical point of view, the applicant we heard wanted to set it within the vegetation. We've seen the black box and maybe the vegetation is already encroached on the pavement from sort of the existing, if you walk along there now. If we give planning permission today, and does the fence need to be placed exactly where it is on the plans? Or do we want to be able to allow the applicants a little bit of flexibility so that they can set the fence within the vegetation? Is that possible, or is it even an issue?
Mr. Saunders confirmed, but obviously the application is the application, so they've stipulated. But Mr. Saunders?
There's an element of we have to decide what's in front of us, but obviously we can condition things. I would say we'd probably need to get the consultation from the tree officer if we're looking to move the fence, as they agreed the posts and the fence height were okay where they are now. But if we are encroaching more into the trees, I wouldn't want to comment without kind of understanding what their point of view is on that.
Thank you. Do you want to add in?
So I think just from the committee's point of view, there's a practicality in terms of looking at that electricity box, 30 centimetres behind that, all that vegetation will be gone in order to install the fencing. But then the hope is that stuff will be able to grow through. But it sounds as if they won't be able to planting on the pavement side of the fencing to help visually block the fencing. But it's just to bear in mind.
Okay. Ms. Povey, do you want to just add that?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that any planting in front of the fencing on the roadside, that would be a real positive from my point of view. A concern of mine is that the fencing is literally on the back of the pavement there behind the box, as we've talked about, so that there's no room to plant in front of it. So as I say, if there could be planting, if it was moved, but obviously with the tree officer's satisfaction, that would be a positive step.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Rice?
I think that just, sums up sort of where I am. I think I would prefer for it to come back with a different positioning on the plans, just so that it's set sort of half a metre into the greenery rather than having it quite so obtrusive. So I sort of disagree with the proposal just from that point of view. I think it could be
Thank
better.
you. Councillor Salmon.
Thank you. It was just coming back on Councillor Lepedervin's point around would this fence achieve what the residents want? Because I think that came up in the report as well. And I had to think about this, and I think it's been touched on at there may be CCTV at the front. That also the front of the building is very open. The issue around this side of the building is that it is quite densely planted, and therefore you can sort of be hidden from view quite easily, but you can still get through. It's possible to physically get your body through into the grounds of the property, whereas a fence would stop that. And I think that's where it's sort of the attraction of it. I'm thinking back to when I lived in a property where I had a fence that completely blocked view, and once you were over that fence, you couldn't be seen. You were hid from view, and the security measure that we put in place was to put in a fence that you could see through, so that you could climb that fence, but then people would still be able to see what you were doing if you did. And it's kind of the same principle, I think, is at play here. So I can see that the security value is actually there in this case.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Slade.
Thank you. Couple of comments. I believe it's their back garden they're enclosing. So there is an element at the front, you're in a car park, but this is going to protect the back gardens and give them the privacy and security in their back gardens. On the corner of Derby and Niverton, the opposite side, there is a fence that has graffiti on, has been painted over with, so you've got an old battered green, the residue of the trees dripping down, and then it's been slapped over with a little bit of brown paint. So you've got graffiti there. There's also, okay, this is Google views, but I know it's still there. Further down, there is graffiti. A nice, whilst I respect what the officers are saying, and I'm grateful for all their comments, a nice new fence around those perimeters is going to attract people to go and tag it. It happens all the time. So immediately you've got a nice new fence. I hear what you're saying, officers, with it being more in keeping. What's to stop day two? It's just going to be tagged. I think this proposal is the right thing. It's there. It's overgrown. It's me, in my opinion, it's the right thing. So I respect what they're saying, but I do support Councillor Tyler and Councillor Clements with everything you've said so far.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other speakers? So we do have a proposal on the table. Mr. Gould, do you want to just add your interpretation?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just before members go to the vote, so as just to recap, I may have touched on some of this already, so apology for duplication, but you have a report before you which is obviously recommending refusal. There is a move to overturn that and to approve the application contrary to the officer's recommendation. We've heard the reasons from Councillor Tarling, who's moving the vote, that in terms of the scale and design and the impact on the street scene and the conservation area and the nearby listed building is considered to be acceptable. That would obviously link to policy CS39 of the core strategy and 4.4 of the district-wide local plan. In terms of harm to the designated heritage assets, we talked about two of those, one being the listed building, and again Councillor Tarling said that in his judgment he didn't feel there was any harm to the setting of the Langtry Manor Hotel because the two aren't read together, they're physically separated, and as I said, they're not read together in the street scene. In terms of the impact on the harm to the conservation area, he used the word minimal. If I could just refer members to the National Planning Policy Framework, the NPPF as we call it. Paragraph 215 of the NPPF talks about harm to designated heritage assets. It uses the language substantial or less than substantial. Again, not wanting to put words into the mouth of the councillor, but I would seek clarification that maybe minimal is similar to less than substantial. And then, of course, the test that is outlined then goes on to be required to be justified in para 215 is that where there is less than substantial harm to a designated heritage asset, then the public benefits, that this harm should be weighed against the public benefits. And listening again to the debate, there's been talk around the benefits of the security that this fence would deliver to all the residents of Royston Manor. And finally, Chair, the usual bit that with being talk about conditions, adding a planting plan condition, I'd seek clarification on whether there's any other conditions that members would want to add, and the usual thing about obviously delegating authority back to the head of planning operations to delegate to agree the final wording of the decision, which will include the reasons and the wording of the conditions. Thank you, Chair.
That's great, thank you. And just a point, so I think in the application there was going to be no trees removed, so the BNG, it would be de minimis exemption for that, the understanding?
I've had confirmation from the applicant that the current scheme is subject to de minimis. If there is a change to the location of the fence, it would then need tree officer input and probably a relook at the BNG, because that one just needs to be looked at, etc.
Okay, so Councillor Tarling, you're happy with what's been said?
Yeah, absolutely. I just encourage members that it's not just the residents of this street, and I did intimate that my knowledge of Derby Road and Niverton Road is only hearsay, not personal experience, but it does have quite a reputation, and I'm very pleased that Councillor Pedifin is not aware of these issues of what happens in the bushes. So I'm very pleased that you've made that clear.
Can I correct? I am, but I don't see that this is going to stop it, because if people have a mind to, they can still get at the bushes.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that. So we're clear that we're not changing position of fencing, so it's as set out as in the application. So it's been proposed to accept this application. So if you are in agreement, show now.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
If you're against, show now.
1,
And abstain.
1, 2.
So that application has been agreed. So thank you for that. And we'll just take a 5-minute break before the next application.
I hoped you would.
Okay, welcome back. Councillor Gillett, you're...
Yes, I'm just going to recuse myself.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. So this is item 60, Lower Gardens, Bournemouth, and the presenting officer is Miss Evans. Thank you.
Thank you. So this application is in the Lower Gardens in Bournemouth. The application is for the temporary installation of a winter event for the period from the 27th of October 2025 to the 25th of January 2026, including the installation and removal of structures. It has been called to committee by the Head of Planning. To update members, this development is now complete and operating. Here is the site location plan. Here is the approximate red outline over an aerial view. So you can see the application site covers most of the Lower Gardens, stretching from the square down to Pier Approach in predominantly grassed areas. Here are some initial photos taken on the case officer visit in August, showing two of the grassed areas. Here is the first of two site layout plans, the largest element here being the ice rink, which is the same parcel of land as previous years, though with a larger site coverage within this parcel of land. The second site location plan here, the 7 elements annotated on both plans are shown, but to note that some aspects don't require planning permission, such as the Christmas train and the Christmas tree maze. Here is the proposed layout plan for the ice rink. So you can see there's a large skating area, as well as a bar area, skate tyre, and back of house areas. Here you can see the proposed elevations. So the marquee structures measure approximately 6.45 metres in height. The two other structures requiring planning permission shown on the site plan are the games stall, which you can see here with dimensions annotated, including a height of 3 metres. Similarly, you can see the Alpine Chalet here, also 3 metres in height. Looking at some of the key issues, considering character and appearance, the proposed structures, notably the ice rink structures, are substantial in size and visually prominent. However, it's considered that at this time of year, the gardens are not characterised by the same openness and long-range views as at other parts of the year. They are typically dominated by temporary festive installations. The structures are considered to clearly have a temporary appearance, and on a temporary basis, it's considered they're not materially harmful to character and appearance. Considering the impact on character and appearance following the event, concerns have been raised about the impact on grass and lack of recovery. Historically, grass reinstatement conditions have been added for the affected areas to be reseeded. If recommended for approval, it would have been recommended that instead a condition is added for impacted areas to be instead returfed. To note also that the gardens are Grade 2 listed. It's considered that the proposal by way of visual intrusion results in less than substantial harm to the designated heritage assets, though this is considered moderated due to the temporary nature of the proposal. As detailed, if recommended for approval, a condition would be recommended for impacted areas to be returfed. Subject to compliance with submitted information, including the events management plan, submitted pedestrian routes, the flood risk assessment and emergency evacuation plan, the proposal is considered to have an acceptable impact on residential amenity, highway matters and drainage and flooding, and there are no objections from Environmental Health, the local highway authority or the lead local flooding authority. Considering BNG, sufficient information was submitted to show that subject to grass reinstatement, the grass could be restored to its current condition within 2 years, and therefore this impact does not need to be counted for the purpose of the biodiversity net gain metric. The de minimis exemption was therefore claimed by the applicant. However, it was brought to the attention of the planning authority that during the course of the application, a cherry tree was moved from the site. As a small tree measures 41 metres squared within the metric, the application is not exempt. The applicant therefore needs to comply with biodiversity net gain, and there is a legislative requirement for BNG information to be provided with the planning application. The required information has not been submitted, and accordingly the proposal is not compliant. The removal of the cherry tree was not included within the application and was therefore not assessed as part of the tree consultation. It has, however, been confirmed that there would likely be no arboricultural objection to the loss of the tree, subject to replanting. To clarify the tree in question, you can see it circled here on aerial view and here on Google Maps. The tree has historically been protected in previous ice rink applications, as you can see circled on the approved site plan from last year's application. In conclusion, the principle of a temporary winter event, which includes an ice rink, has been established in this location. There are considered to be significant public benefits, comprising an enhanced leisure offering in the town centre, a draw for both residents and tourists, and economic benefit to the town centre. It's agreed that the proposal would result in less than substantial harm to a designated heritage asset, which is moderated by the temporary duration of the event. However, this harm is considered to be outweighed by the public benefits of the scheme. However, the proposal fails to comply with legislative requirements for biodiversity net gain and is not exempt from the legislation. Therefore, it's considered that the proposal cannot be supported and it is recommended for refusal today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Eden, for the presentation. If we can go to speakers, please.
Thank you, Chair. So we have no public objectors registered. Speaking in support of the application, we have Simon Smith, the applicant, and Martin Davies, the chair of the Bournemouth Town Centre bid. You have 5 minutes to share between you.
Chair, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak. I will go quickly. We were awarded the contract to deliver the entire Christmas offering back in January of this year. We formally received our contract on the 14th of October, a month ago. Planning for this event was submitted on the 7th of July, and the specific tree that's become the focus of this refusal was being discussed openly with the Council Parks team as early as May and June, and a loose agreement on the 5th of June. The purpose of this contract is to deliver the full Christmas programme with a free to all lights programme, trees and activities within the lower gardens. We have been awarded because Council no longer has the finances to do it itself. There's a funding gap of around £200,000, which we are privately having to make up. This application does not solely relate solely to the ice rink. It covers the entire Christmas offering, as you have heard. The ice rink, however, is the financial driver that enables everything else to take place. Without it, there can be no security, staff, toilets, paramedics, 24-hour cover. And obviously, if it is refused, everything must go with this, all the lights, because we will not be able to run it. I want to address the matter of the unauthorised removal of the cherry tree. The tree was assessed as being in a moderate to poor condition. In conversations with the Parks team and the head of Parks, they advised it was potentially going to be relocated. We asked whether that process could be expedited to allow for our site. They agreed on the basis that we would fund some replacement trees as their budgets had been reduced. I agreed to finance them buying and planting 6 new trees, clear net gain. The Parks team then presented that to the Lower Gardens Trust, where it was formally signed off and ratified. Only following that authorisation did the Parks Department, not us, remove that tree. But that, by any reasonable interpretation, is an authorised action. The refusal now rests entirely on the BNG metric. BNG obviously was created to stop, for example, a developer chopping down a forest to build a block of flats, resulting in a permanent loss of habitat. It was never designed for short-term temporary events. The Council's own planning officers have acknowledged to us that applying BNG to the situation is being done in the harshest, most rigid way and feels disproportionate. Our ecologists in Zygo, one of the top ecological consultancies in the UK, have assessed the gardens and confirmed that should we provide a like-for-like replacement, a native wild cherry tree of the same size glass and the same baseline condition, then BNG does not apply. Both Zygo and our planning lawyer have advised us, in line with the BNG user guide, that where habitat can be restored to its baseline type and condition within 2 years, the impact is recorded as a temporary loss, not a permanent one. And if it is temporary, the statutory biodiversity gain requirement does not apply. In other words, the refusal reason misinterprets the BNG metric. There is no net loss requiring a 10% gain calculation, and therefore no basis to judge the application as non-compliant. The irony of all of this is if we had done nothing and waited, that tree, if left untouched, would probably die and be removed anyway in a matter of weeks or months. I want to be completely clear, we did not proceed with this application arrogantly. Every step of the way was taken from advice from qualified ecologists and planning lawyers who deemed that we were consistently advised us we were acting correctly and within policy. All other planning matters, if you've heard, including grass reinstatement, layout and heritage, have been deemed acceptable. We genuinely believe that this matter would be resolved and Christmas would have been continued. Members, we're offering a fully privately funded event that brings the town to life, replaces the tree responsibly and results in a net biodiversity gain with new trees. We respectfully ask the committee to approve this application and let Christmas continue.
Chair, members of the committee, I'll be brief. I speak on behalf of the 700 town centre businesses who are the levy payers, predominantly high street and retail, for whom the next 5-6 weeks up to Christmas is absolutely critical. Times in the high street are particularly tough, as you all know, we will all know, and a successful trade to Christmas and a decent footfall with a Christmas offering in the town centre is key to some of my members making it through next spring. But I appreciate that isn't a planning ground. So I'm going to put my lawyer's hat on for a minute. And there is a significant difference between what your presenting officer told you and the reason for refusal in the committee report. The presenting officer told you the reason that because of the removal of the tree, a de minimis rules for BNG don't apply. The reason for refusal given in the committee papers is that by reason of the unauthorised removal of the cherry tree, the BNG net gain doesn't apply. As you've heard, the tree was removed by BCP Parks Department. The tree is in a BCP park. On what basis could you conceivably form the view that that tree was not authorised in its removal? If BCP Parks Department isn't authorised to remove a tree in a BCP park, who is? And if the removal was not unauthorised, then the statement in the report that the reason for refusal is the unauthorised removal removes the net the BNG de minimis clearly cannot stand. The BNG de minimis clearly stands because the removal was authorised, and in consequence, the secondary reasons on provision of information don't even bite. We have an issue which is going to present a massive problem to my levy players, a reputational issue for BCP. You may very well form the opinion that removing the tree was not desirable. That is a matter of opinion. You cannot, in my submission, conceivably conclude that when your own Parks Department removed it, it was unauthorised. The de minimis applies, and I would respectfully submit that you should please grant this application and let us get on with Christmas. Thank you.
Thank you. Apologies. Next up, we have a series of other councillors who would like to speak. First, the ward councillor, Councillor Jamie Martin. Members, could I just ask you to clarify in the capacity you're speaking in your introduction? That'd be most helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm here today speaking in my capacity as a ward councillor and not as a member or vice chair of the Lower Gardens Trust Board. I want to speak in support of this application because I know just how much my residents value the Christmas tree wonderland and the associated concessions. This event brings much needed light, warmth and joy to some of the darkest months of the year, and my residents genuinely love having it right on their doorstep. For many people, this is one of the few moments in winter when they feel encouraged to come out, enjoy the town centre and feel part of the life of Bournemouth. It creates a sense of community, safety and shared experience. It brings family, friends and neighbours together at a time of year when people can otherwise become quite isolated. It has also become one of the key economic boosts of the winter season, helping local businesses and sustaining footfall when it is most needed. I mention safety because the papers raised concerns that the event could lead to an increase in antisocial behaviour. I don't have the statistics myself, and it may be that with millions of people passing through the town centre and gardens during these months, that certain incidents may increase simply due to scale. But this highlights the difference between perception and actuality. The perception amongst my residents is that this event and others like it make the town feel safer, not less safe. The lighting, the positive activity, the presence of the security staff, the increased visibility of our partner organisations all create a sense of safety and of reassurance and supervision that residents generally feel. This is their lived experience of the town centre during this event. I also want to emphasise that in support of all of this, my residents are not economic vandals. The Lower Gardens are not merely a site outlined on this planning map, nor simply a place of general civic pride. For those of us who live in and around the town centre, they are our collective back garden. They are where we go for recreation, relaxation, and enjoy the blue and green spaces that make Bournemouth such a wonderful place to live. Because of this, the care of the gardens and their biodiversity matters deeply to us. We do not dismiss environmental responsibility. The council grouped together the various elements of the Christmas offer and put the event out to tender to ensure we continue delivering something that has become a valued fixture of Bournemouth's winter identity. An event now recognised as a destination in its own right. This sits alongside the wider work of the council, the work of the town centre panel, and many others committed to ensuring that Bournemouth continues to regenerate, reinvent and thrive. Christmas Tree Wonderland does not permanently remove habitat or diminish biodiversity in and of itself. From what has been said, the Lower Gardens Trust Board did agree to the removal of the tree and that mitigations was put in place for the further planting of trees, and that this has been done by the Parks team. So now that it's a staple of the calendar and will return each year, we must recognise what repeated temporary permissions mean within the biodiversity net gain framework. If each season is treated as a separate development and a reason found to make each annual event to have its own BNG requirement without the de minimis aspect, the compounding effect becomes disproportionate. It risks making this and any similar temporary event unsustainable, and I do not believe that's the intention of the Environment Act. Given that and the multi-year commitment to put on this event, and the council's desire to have this event as a long-term fixture in our calendar, it would be far more effective for us all to work together to develop a proportionate long-term BNG approach for this recurring temporary event. Perhaps a recommendation of developing a single multi-year strategy would ensure that the event is continued to be managed in an environmentally coherent and responsible way, rather than treating each season as an entirely new development. That approach would allow you to grant this application today, recognising the social, cultural and economic value it brings to Bournemouth, while still upholding the principles that guide decisions on future permanent developments. Thank you for your attention.
Councillor Sarah Armstrong.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair and members, for giving me the opportunity to speak today. And I want to be really clear from the offset, I'm not the Grinch and I'm not here to cancel Christmas, because Bournemouth's Christmas offer really does matter. It brings a lot of joy to families. We're hearing about how important it is to our local business community, and it's an important part of our identity. But traditions must sit alongside proper, consistent processes and respect for our heritage. And what has happened here is not okay. Installation began on the 27th of October. The rink opened to the public on the 13th of November, a week before this committee could even consider the application. Bookings have been taken all the way through up to January. I believe this puts this committee as decision makers in a really difficult position, trying to assess this application objectively while the structures are trading and the public has been led to expect continuity. I do not believe that this is fair to this committee. There are outstanding questions about the biodiversity net gain compliance, and I was very sad to hear that a cherry tree was cut down during the installation. And it really does need to be established whether the applicant has now provided the required biodiversity metric, and the council, as a council, we need a comprehensive and transparent BNG framework to be working to. I do want to highlight issues about potential for heritage harm. The gardens are a Grade 2 listed registered park and gardens, and the site sits within the setting of the Grade 2 listed pavilion theatre. Thirdly, I want to highlight the process failures and the potential of those. And just in the previous conversation that we've just had, you know, if a resident was doing this, enforcement would be swift and serious. Why should the council or its partners be treated any differently to our residents? The final point I want to make is about that this is not an isolated way of working or incident, because in May of last year, the Audit and Governance Committee received a report from senior officers promising improvements after previous breaches involving temporary structures along the seafront, setting up without planning permission. Training was delivered, lessons were supposedly learned, and yet here we are again with the UK's longest ice rink installed without consent on a listed site. So this is another governance failure, just plain and simple. I've personally written to senior officers, including the Chief Executive, to the Audit and Governance Committee and to the Lower Gardens Trust Board, raising my concerns. I have received no response, and this is not okay. Silence does not resolve government's failings, it compounds them. So, to complete, I want to be clear, I'm not here to stop or cancel Christmas, but I do believe that our residents need to be treated with the same equity and benefit of the doubt that is potentially going to be applied here. Because if a resident breached any planning law or there was any sort of shadow of a doubt about how they had navigated a planning process, enforcement would be immediate. And we need consistency, transparency, and fairness. Again, but to balance that, yes, with the public benefits of economic uplift, festive tradition, but this should not override the statutory requirements. So my request would be that this application is dealt with in the way that it needs to be under our guidance and planning law, but also that for further full investigation to ensure that lessons are genuinely learned, that this should be referred to overview and scrutiny for a full investigation, and the lessons generally learned, not just promised in reports. Thank you.
And the next speaker is Councillor Bernadette Nonovo.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Councillor Bernadette Nonovo and I represent East Southbourne and Tuckton Ward. I am on the Lower Gardens Trust Board also, and however, I'm speaking today on behalf of our residents who will want to come into town this Christmas and enjoy all that has been put on here in the town centre at great expense. Only this morning, I met a resident who has tickets booked for her family, and she was concerned about what would happen after today's planning meeting. This application comes before this committee today, a week after the skate park opened, which clearly indicates a serious breakdown in the planning process. Given what we already know about biodiversity net gain and the complexities it creates for clubs and businesses seeking to develop or extend facilities on public land, I was concerned about the ice rink when the new contract was granted earlier on this year. We all remember how the summer skate was derailed in 2024 because of B&G requirements, leaving residents frustrated after planning their summer activities around the skate park. Whatever has gone wrong here, it is not the fault of our residents or local businesses, and they should not have their Christmas plans cancelled because of a procedural glitch. Permission was granted to remove the tree in question, which was dying, and it has been replaced, I understand, with 6 more. So that is not the problem. The application relates to a temporary Christmas event, and there are clearly extenuating circumstances. Therefore, I urge the committee to act in the best interests of both the town's businesses and our residents by granting temporary permission for this Christmas season. The B&G issue can and should be addressed in the new year for the remainder of this contract. Thank you.
Next speaker is Councillor Andy Martin.
So, Chair, members, thank you for the invitation to say a few words. And you'll please know I'm going to cut what I was going to say in half because most of it has already been covered. So I am here representing the residents and the businesses of the town centre. So first of all, I'd like to express my support for the applicant who has invested significantly in our town in the last 9 years, something that has become even more important when BCP continues to experience financial challenges and is more and more reliant on others to deliver what we can no longer do. I think that's absolutely crucial. I'd also like to express my support for our town centre and its businesses. I know it's already been said, but it is one of our priorities as a local authority to help reimagine, reinvent, regenerate the town centre And Christmas is a fundamental part of that. And it's a critical part of bringing in footfall. And as Mr. Davies mentioned, for our trade for our hard-pressed business community in this golden quarter. In terms of planning, I would ask the board respectfully to consider the proportionality of what is being proposed here. As the planning officer has pointed out, there are a range of factors considered around this application, from highways, economy, character, heritage, to the impacts of flooding, all of which are deemed to be acceptable levels of harm rather than significant enough to require refusal from the committee. So it meets the planning balance apart from BNG. Mr. Davies has very clearly laid out the planning arguments here, and I don't have any need to repeat what he said. I would simply ask members whether this is in fact wholly disproportionate and contrary to the spirit of national policy, which encourages pragmatic solutions. On the tree, the professional advice from the council's own ecologist supports a de minimis exemption. I respectfully again ask the committee to give weight to the expert evidence rather than assumptions around the tree. Can I also make the point that the councillor who has objected to the application, I believe it's the only person who's made an objection, refers to the tree being the last of a row of cherry trees, which presumably have been taken out for good reason in the general management of the garden over the past few decades. And as Mr. Smith has pointed out, removal was not requested by the applicant, but in response to this news, he offered to provide 6 replacement trees elsewhere in the gardens. And I note that the loss of the cherry trees detailed at paragraph 62 as not having a significant arboricultural impact. The last point I'd like to make is that members may be aware that the government recently consulted on and is now reviewing the entire BNG framework on the basis that it isn't working properly, it's too complex, and it certainly should not be applying to the type of temporary structures and development such as this one. And I would ask members to bear that in mind. So finally, I would just urge you please to allow this development to go ahead, or allow this application to go through. Thank you very much.
And last speaker is Councillor Matt Gillett.
Hello, I'm, as you're aware, Councillor Matt Gillett, and I'm speaking as a councillor. I am also chair of the Lower Gardens Trust. So, when the gardens were established as pleasure gardens, and it was to present a place where people could congregate for pleasure. The area where the ice rink is currently was originally designated as tennis courts. That's why the grass doesn't grow there very well. Then it became a large fountain area, which is why there's hundreds of pipes and stuff running under the ground. Then for a short while, it was a display garden, well, an event field, then a display garden, but it didn't really work because you couldn't really grow anything there. And then after the gardens were listed in 1986, it returned to its original purpose, and an observation bloom was installed so that it could become a pleasure garden again. It is this ability to transition that has reflected the fact that we still have this facility. Many seaside resorts no longer have their pleasure gardens, or they've been sort of drifted off in a direction, in a place like Blackpool. So there were over 5 million visits to Bournemouth Town Centre in the last 6 weeks of 2024. And this is one of the very few towns where we actually saw an increase in footfall. And it is estimated that 50% of those people visited the Alpine Christmas event, if only briefly. For context, that's 2.5 million people in that 6-week period. That is more visitors than the British Museum, Kew Gardens, or Windsor Great Park received. The key anchor of this event is the ice rink. The ice rink pays for the electric, the security guards, that mean that per visitor, this is the lowest time of year for ASB. It also means that the toilets can be kept open. If the toilet's shut, then the cookie making and the Santa Experience Hut cannot operate because kids need toilets. The retail and hospitality premises in Bournemouth are hanging on by a thread, and they need this ice rink because it's a chain of events that will all shut down if you start down that route. There is no money in the pot for Christmas lights anymore. There hasn't been since 2023. And this event was engineered to be self-funded, but deemed by local businesses to be so useful
that, as you heard today, some of them have put their hands in their own pockets to ensure that it can be expanded. So coming back to the application, many authorities have put their Christmas events through licensing as thus avoiding any brushes with BNG legislation. And I understand that the understanding of the 1990 Town Planning Act is that BCP are probably correct in treating this as a full application. But many of the markets that you're seeing around the various areas around the south are just going through as licensing. So this means we have to consider the 2021 Environment Act, and we have to consider biodiversity net gain as a full application. But interpreting any act requires understanding its intention. If every event that we put in the gardens requires full planning permission and a full BNG, and we hold 2 events a year, that 10% is going to compound. So after the first year, we're going to be looking at a 21% biodiversity net gain. The power of compounding will continue. So let's say by year 12, we need a 985% biodiversity net gain in order to continue having events. That's about the same as sort of like an Amazonian rainforest that you're asking us to put in the gardens. After 30 years, you'd be looking at a 30,500% increase in BNG. Basically not possible by ecological any ecological interpretation. When interpreting any act, you have to look at the intention. The Environment Act of 2021 that introduces BNG, it states its intention that a 10% BNG is over 30 years. Clearly, its intention was never to cover places that have multiple events. This isn't some sort of, oh, it is or it isn't. We've seen that recently with different interpretations or the gender interpretation, all those sorts of things. This is as clear as day. 30,500% is not 10% over 30 years. And the government recognises this, which is why they're reviewing BNG for events currently. In reality, this means that the only way that an event can continue is if they purchase BNG credits. I do also want to cover, I know it's been said before, the cherry tree was not removed by the operator. It was moved a priori by the owner of the land, BCP. They discussed it with Savanta, and that's the operator, and there was a suggestion that 6 new trees would be planted and that Savanta might pay for them because we like getting people to pay for stuff in the gardens. But I've been advised under the Town and Country Planning Act of 1990, only the owner of the land is responsible for ensuring planning permission is granted when they authorise the work themselves. And the insistence on adding it to this application is an utterly false premise. We should be sitting here today with a retrospective application by BCP for the removal of the tree that they removed themselves. The millions of visitors, the shops and the bars, and the hundreds of people commenting on social media really need your help today. If we can add a condition that the environmental impact is delegated to the officers and the applicant to be properly assessed and the commitment written into the condition so that we just basically buy some BNG credits, or even better, why don't we just ask them to plant a healthier cherry tree than the one which was nearly dead that BCP and the Gardens Committee decided was probably ought to come down anyway. So by the end of January, this event will be gone. And somewhere in the country, if you buy a few credits, there'll be somewhere with an improvement in the nature and environment. By June, the grass will be reseeded and will return to its rather miserable trefoil mix, which it's had for hundreds of years.
Are you wrapping up?
Yeah, I might do. I did tell you I'd go over 5.
Thank you for your speeches. So joined by Mr. Bishop, Head of Planning, do you want to just come back on the BMG challenges? Thank you.
Yeah, actually, I was going to ask, we've got the ecologist online and the case officer. I think it's just important to set out why the BNG now applies and why it's not de minimis. So, Eden, do you want to lead on that and then pass on to Julie? Yeah.
Yeah. So, as set out in the report and in my presentation, the applicant provided a statement in relation to the exemption that was claimed, which was the de minimis exemption, which looked predominantly at the impact on the grass. And as per the BNG metric guidance, if it can be restored to its condition within 2 years, it doesn't have to be counted as an impact for the purpose of the metric. So that was accepted on the basis of the condition of the grass at the moment. The removal of a tree that is over 25 square metres, which means that the de minimis exemption thresholds have been exceeded. And yeah, I would pass over to my colleague on further information.
Yeah. So when assessing the impact of the development, it doesn't matter who took the tree away, it's whether it was taken away as a result of the development. And a small tree in the metric is the equivalent of 41 square metres, which is above the 25 square metre threshold for de minimis. And that automatically means that the mandatory biodiversity net gain requirements set out in the legislation are required to be met. And this was conveyed to the applicant. What were the specific questions on BNG you wanted me to answer?
Yeah, so it was really about the de minimis status and, as you say, why this comes in. It might be for yourself or Mr. Convery from legal just to confirm the statutory requirements, because we've obviously heard that, well, is there flexibility?
There is no flexibility. It is written into legislation. So as soon as the biodiversity net gain requirements are triggered, there are certain things that the applicant is required by law to provide. That includes a metric which calculates the value of the habitats on the site as it is at the moment. Habitat plans to clearly show where the habitats are, which must be to scale and with north shown on them. A habitat plan to show the habitats post-development, and then the metric to be completed to show how the 10% net gain would be calculated. The slightly different scenario here, because we're within 10 metres of the Bourne stream, is that this automatically means that they also need to do a biodiversity net gain metric assessment for the stream and show a 10% net gain for the water habitat units.
Okay, thank you for that. Mr. Convery, did you want to come in at all on BNG statutory legislation? You're on mute. Yes.
Hello, can you hear?
Yeah, I hear.
Yes, I just from the legal point of view, and I can't really talk about the merits one way or the other, but from the legal point of view, what you're being advised by your planning officers and environmental officers is 100% correct. Having said that, if the committee is minded to grant the permission, and we have to try and find a way of doing that without breaking the law, as it were. It's a very funny thing, the way the BNG legislation is framed, because the BNG condition doesn't actually come into effect until after planning permission has been granted. I think what the officers are saying to you is, well, we can't really advise you to grant permission here because they haven't fulfilled all the pre-application requirements. But there is a way forward, I think, that if the committee were minded and wanted to grant permission, they could defer they could give a minded to grant decision, defer the decision to the chief officer, which would then be taken when the relevant environmental information has been provided. And then the developer would still have to meet the statutory BNG condition. That isn't necessarily going to involve works on site. It could be done by the purchase of environmental units or credits. That has a cost to it. But nevertheless, there is a way forward here that if the committee would be entirely within its rights to refuse the application on the basis that the information hasn't been provided. But if, on the other hand, it wants to defer, give the applicant more time to provide the information, and then the chief officer could, if so delegated, grant permission, then the BNG condition would click in and say to the fact, in effect, they should not have started development, but we're beyond that point now. but nevertheless, it could be fulfilled by the purchase of credits or units or some other means of on-site works. So there is a way forward if the committee wants to pursue it.
Appreciate that, Mr. Convery, for that information. So open up to councillors for questions. Councillor Salmon.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to row back to sort of what I consider to be the most fundamental question in this particular situation, which is why has this application not come to committee before the period of time when the Christmas offering was already having to be open in the Lower Gardens? Can someone just talk me through the process of what's happened there, please?
Yeah, so the primary issue with this one is that the loss of the tree came to light after the application was submitted. So that fundamentally changed the makeup of the application.
Really sorry to interrupt, but this hasn't been deferred from a previous planning committee or anything like that, has it? The timing of Christmas is fixed. Christmas has always been when Christmas is, and the stuff that's been put in the Lower Gardens had always needed to be put in at a certain time. So why has the planning application not come to committee before that has all happened? That's I understand that the tree thing came to light at a late stage, but that can't be why the application didn't come in time before anything was built.
No, but if you let me finish, then I'll be able to answer the question. So initially, when the application was submitted, we weren't aware that the tree needs to be removed. That changed the assessment of the application. So when it was submitted, they submitted it on the basis that the de minimis exemption applied. Therefore, at that point in time, we were looking at a delegated decision. When it became apparent that the tree had been removed, that changes the application considerably. It now means that it's not de minimis and we need to apply B&G. As soon as we were aware of that fact, we communicated with the applicant and said, you're no longer de minimis, you need to supply us with all the relevant information, i.e. the metric, so we can establish the baseline and then work out the 10% gain. So that's how the discussion went. Initial discussions were that they didn't agree with us, but then they said that they agreed and they would provide us information. So we gave them the opportunity to provide the information. That wasn't forthcoming. And then that whole process has taken us to where we are now. And this is the earliest committee we could get it to, subject to that. So if they'd provided us the information, then it most likely would, if the tree hadn't been removed, most likely would have been a delegated decision. If they provided the information that we needed or amended the scheme slightly, we did talk to them about reducing the size of the ice rink, take it out of the water zone, for example, so it'd be a simpler assessment. None of those were forthcoming. So we worked very closely with the applicants to try and find a solution rather than refuse it or do anything else. But this is the earliest time we could get it to committee.
Okay, Councillor Slade.
Possibly one for the applicants. These 6 trees, I've heard conflicting things. Have they been planted or have they not been planted yet? Is one of them. And I'm interested, do we have, I know it's not a planning issue, but do we have any indication as to the cost on the economy if this isn't granted, if it's refused?
Ms. Eden,
two, if I can answer.
About the trees and...
I don't have this information submitted with the planning application.
And similarly, the issue about the economy.
I'm not able to answer that question.
Can I direct them to the applicant, who I suspect will have the answers as to whether they've been planted? And
committee happy with that? Yeah. So if you like to come back.
Yeah, so the trees have not been planted. That is an entirely parks thing. So we've committed to paying for them, and they will submit them wherever they want. Obviously, there's significant discussion over where they need to go, if they need to go in this particular bit to remove the B&G. And then the 2024 survey was about £18 million invested into the city centre.
Okay, appreciate that information. Were there any other points, Councillor Slade? Yeah. Councillor Canavan.
Well, 2 questions really. So the explanation that we've just had about B&G, in what way is that the fault of the applicant? Because it doesn't strike me that it was their fault. So why should they be penalised for the fact that we're inefficient? being able to manage something which has been an annual event for some considerable period of time now. And the BNG issue, this is not the first time that we've had to consider BNG applications for temporary accommodation. We've had it before. So I'm really struggling to understand why we didn't see this train coming. But perhaps in terms of a question, Chair, in terms of the additional supplement that we've had, it says that the BNG information, the additional BNG information was submitted by the applicant and it was reviewed by the BNG lead on the 14th of November. And the submitted information remains insufficient to meet statutory requirements. So could somebody explain to me on what basis it doesn't comply?
Ms. Eden, can you just provide some information of like the timeline of discussions and where we are with that BNG requirement? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so I have a brief kind of timeline of the application for you. So in terms of the question around BNG and the information that was submitted, then the Planning Authority advised the applicant in late September that the application would have to comply with BNG. Shortly after that, we had a meeting with the applicant to try and look for ways forward and discuss information that would be needed. Following that, we were waiting for information. This was received on Thursday. This was turned around quickly on Friday with feedback from the BNG lead, who's on the call and can detail that feedback if helpful. And that brings us to committee because this was Thursday and Friday of last week.
Thank you for that. Councillor Canavan, did you want to?
So we have a situation where, according to that, the application was valid in August.
Yeah, that's correct. So that's when we started working on the application. The valid application was from August. It was publicised from this point, and we started assessing the application from this point. So leading up to the section of time that I just stated, then we were working with the applicant to receive further information, have this assessed by consultees, address the other issues, and then it came to the attention of the Planning Authority in September that the tree had been removed. So in August, when the planning application was valid and I conducted my site visit, this tree was still in situ.
Can I just add a little bit on that? So on 6th of August, the application was valid. So the case officer had 8 weeks to determine this application, which meant that the first week of October would be the determination time. However, in the middle of September, the loss of this tree came to our notice. So we were informed about this. So obviously, once you get to know about that, then we had to stop assessing the application and we were trying to find solutions. We had meetings with the applicants as the case officers shown you on the timeline. So that's how we have been working, trying to find a solution. And because you couldn't find a solution, we are here in front of you today. And the question regarding BNG and the information that were provided to us on 13th of November, it was assessed by the ecology officer who can tell you more about why the information that was presented to us last week was not sufficient. So maybe, Julie, would you like to come on this point, please?
Ms. Addington, are you there?
Sorry. Yeah. So the information that is still missing is we don't have a valid habitat plan, and it does appear that the information in the metric doesn't match the full site plan, so that the habitat plan and the habitat that's recorded in the metric must be everything that's within the red line for the planning application. And also the information for the river assessment has been put into the post-development part of the metric. So we can't be sure of what the baseline assessment for the river is. And from the information provided, the applicant wouldn't be able to make up the 10% net gain on site. They've given us no information about proposed tree planting, but also it would need 10% net gain on the other habitats. And we have no information about how they would achieve the net gain.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Canavan?
So has there then been any discussion with the applicant about purchasing BNG credits?
In the meeting on the 3rd of October, we discussed the options with the applicant, which included changing the red line to reduce the size of area that would be impacted by a BNG. We talked about the kind of units and credits that they'd need to buy. And then from that meeting, we were waiting until 13th of November to hear back from them and what they were planning to do for BNG, as we say. And obviously, that was only last week. The information provided didn't explain how they were going to meet up the 10% net gain.
But did it respond to the issue about purchasing BNG credits?
No, it didn't. We've got no information about what they're intending to do, whether they would be buying units or credits.
Okay, Councillor Rice.
Yeah, can I get some clarification on two aspects with the BNG? The tree being removed, it sounds as if from one of the representations that it was the Parks team were happy to remove it for a variety of different reasons. It wasn't just this event, and this event is temporary, so you're not going to remove a tree for a temporary event. Like only for a temporary event, I don't imagine. What I'm wondering is, we're making the assumption that this tree has been removed because of this planning application, whereas I'm actually thinking it was going to be removed anyway. Does that make any difference to the BNG requirements?
So my understanding is that although the tree wasn't in the best of health, there were no plans to remove the tree at this time. It wasn't a danger to anybody. And in previous years, the tree has been protected as part of the measures for the ice rink. They had a cutout sort of square where the ice wasn't, so that the tree could remain. So from what I've been told, the tree was removed at the request of the applicant to enable the event to happen at this time, even if the council might have had plans at some future date to remove it, but I'm not aware of that. In terms of the impact for BNG, it's whether the development impacts on the habitat. So because the tree was removed as a result of the larger ice rink this year, that is why the de minimis exemption has been exceeded.
So I just wanted to check, just with regards to the amount of grass that is damaged and then has to be resown or returfed. If the tree hadn't been removed or been removed for a different reason, is the amount of grass damage, does that still stay within the de minimis regulations, or does that actually itself require BNG?
So the grass, when you're assessing the habitat within a planning application site, you look at what the habitat type is, but you also do a condition assessment. The grass is already assessed as being in poor condition, and that has a particular value within the metric. So whilst the grass is impacted by the development, it doesn't change that condition, but because there is no condition below poor, so the condition would stay the same. So the grass effectively isn't impacted, and so the de minimis exemption would still apply if it was just the grass that was being considered.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So Mr. Convery obviously was talking about a possible a deferment option or a condition to explore that work could be done with the applicant to find the BNG solution. Could you explain what that could look like from a committee's point of view, please?
Yeah, so obviously, if you wanted to propose a deferral so that the BNG could be resolved, I think all I would say to that point is that we don't currently have enough information to make a decision. So we don't have the metric established. So when you submit an application that's BNG applicable, they need to submit a metric which establishes the baseline, so the current biodiversity value of that site. Once you've got that baseline, you can then calculate what your 10% is going to be, and then it's for the applicant to determine how they provide that 10%. They've got to do a hierarchical approach and provide as much as that as possible on site. And if they can't, then there's the issue of they then may be able to provide off-site credits. So depending on what they do, there's cost implications of that. So in essence, to answer your question, you can defer the application, but at this point, I don't think we can advise, and the ecologists can't really advise what that 10% gain is going to look like or how achievable it is. So whether we can find that out in another month is unclear, personally, given that it's taken us as probably 6 to 8 weeks to get the information that we've got from the applicant, which is still not sufficient. I think it's probably unlikely, which is why we've decided to take it to committee. In terms of adding a condition, I think maybe Brian can advise on this, but I'd be wary of applying a condition because BNG is different to normal conditions. It's a legislative requirement. Once you've approved something, it's in two parts. I think Brian touched on it earlier. So ordinarily, in order to approve it, subject to BNG, you'd have to have an agreement on the metric, so the baseline. We don't currently have that, because then what you would do is you'd approve it and you'd attach the statutory condition which says you need to provide 10%, and that is a pre-commencement condition. So in terms of this application, we don't currently have an agreed metric, and even if we did, you'd then be applying a pre-commencement condition to something that's already started. So I don't think that is the legalities of that I'm unclear of. Perhaps Brian could come in on that.
Mr. Convery? Thank you.
Yeah. So I think what's missing here is the baseline. I think that I think what's necessary for, I mean, as I say, you could simply refuse it today on the basis that you haven't been given sufficient information. So it'd be perfectly legal and lawful for you to simply say, no, we refuse the application. If the committee is minded to, as it were, allow a little bit of latitude, then it could be deferred or delegated to the chief officer to take a decision when he has the basic metric. So once that information is decided, he could then say, yes, I think I will grant permission. Now, the condition, as your officer has explained, would then automatically kick in. You don't have to impose a condition. The condition is imposed by law. Now, it's quite right to say that in this particular case, they will already automatically be in breach of the condition because they've started work on site. But that doesn't absolve us, I don't think, from trying to find a solution short of going straight to enforcement action. So if someone has started on site, and it does happen, and it's happening quite a lot actually in the early days of BNG, the next step is to say, well, you've got your permission subject to the standard legal BNG condition, but you're already in breach. Now, before we take enforcement action, what are you going to do? And then the person then enters into an agreement to buy units or whatever, and we never take enforcement action. So the fact that it's in breach doesn't mean that we can't grant the permission. It just means we have to find a way around the breach of the condition which has taken place. So it would be lawful for you to, as I say, once you've got the metric information, delegate to the chief officer, if he's satisfied that the metric information has been provided, to say, yes, I grant permission, but it is subject to that BNG condition, which is, as I say, is imposed by statute. We don't need to do anything. And then how are you, the developer or the applicant, how are you going to meet that condition that you should have provided? Otherwise, we'll have to take enforcement action against you.
And that enforcement action could be quite serious. It could include, for instance, a prosecution on the basis of a breach of condition notice. So there would be a very strong incentive on who's ever in breach to actually do the necessary.
Okay, that's useful. Councillor Tarling.
Yeah, just on the BNG, and I picking a hypothetical here. Firstly, I just say that officers are duty bound to give their professional legal opinion, and whatever they're saying here is their duty to do so. And I think we have to respect that as members of the council, but we are the council, not the officers, and we are here to protect the position of the council and for the benefit of our residents. But that's a precursor to what I'm about to say. Mr. Convery got very close to answering the question. The enforcement of BNG then is done by who? By what body enforces the Environment Act legislation?
Mr. Bishop.
Yeah, so that would be ourselves. So we'd have planning enforcement would deal with that.
So if we were to take and the BNG has, as we've just heard from the officers, it was compliant in August, and then somebody cut down the tree. Now, George Washington didn't lie about chopping down an apple tree, and likewise here, he says he told his mum that he had to chop down an apple, or he chopped down an apple tree. We've actually had the same admission in this very room by Councillor Gillett, who cut down the cherry tree. And he didn't lie. He was very honest and open. I welcome that. So there's a point of discussion there, and I don't know who would be prosecuting who and for why, and that's the legal thing that I'm asking here, is that would we be obliged to prosecute ourselves if we establish that the tree was cut down by a BCP employer directed by a committee led by a BCP member?
If that's relevant.
Yeah, I'll answer that as best I can. I think firstly, whether whoever cut down the tree per se is not particularly relevant from the planning point of view. The primary issue in terms of whether the tree counts towards the BNG or not is whether it is impacted by the development. So this tree needs to be removed in order to facilitate the ice rink. So in previous years, the ice rink was smaller and it went around the tree. This year, the ice rink is bigger and it's positioned differently, and it is in such a place where the tree needed to be removed anyway. So we weren't aware of that when the application was submitted. It wasn't made clear. That only came to light during the course of the application. So that's the primary factor in respect of the BNG. The tree has been removed, but even if it hadn't been removed, we would have had to count it anyway because it gets impacted by this development. Previous years, it was retained, the ice rink was cut out. Do you want to show the slide, Ian? Yeah. So that's why we need to take it into account for this application. That's why it applies. So in respect of prosecuting, if we were to take enforcement action, then any notices would be served on the applicant and the landowner. So we would have to serve notice on ourselves. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. So if there's no further questions, if we go into Councillor Flagg.
Thank you, Chair. Not wishing to muddy the waters further, what is the right of appeal should the committee be minded to refuse the application this morning? And the reason I say this is because within the licensing, if the licensing committee refuses an application or takes away a license, the applicant or the license holder has the right of appeal to the magistrate's court, and the license holder is permitted to carry on using those premises until such times as that item comes to before the magistrate's court. So my question is, should we be minded to refuse the application, would the applicant have the opportunity to appeal the decision, and how long it would take for that appeal to go before the planning inspectorate?
Thank you. Mr. Bishop.
Yes, is the short answer to your question. They've got a right of appeal to the planning inspectorate. Appeal of this type would probably take in the region of 6 months before we get a decision back.
Thank you. Okay, so if we move into the debate, as it seems to be the legend. Councillor Slade.
I'd want us to find a way to make it work. The negligence lies on, in my view, the member of staff of BCP. I hear what everyone said, but we need to find a way to do it with the impact it's going to have on residents, on the economy. They will plant the trees. I think everything's been said that needs to be said, but we have to make this work somewhere or other, in my view. Yeah, let's chat.
Yeah, Councillor Tanning.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I'm going to refer back to a previous decision I made on the skate park. And I know we're focusing on one tree here, as I just mentioned in one of my questions. And the reason I objected to the skate park was because of the loss of amenity in the summer in the area and the ratio of leisure space to drinking space of that facility. It was more about the TV screens and the bars than the little roller rink. This is a different offering, and we've heard from many speakers about the size of the ice, the actual area of ice as a ratio, and how many people and families it brings in. This is not an offering about drinking and so on. So it is a recreational facility out and out. So whereas I've been against this sort of development in the past, and we've heard that there's no impact on the heritage aspect or de minimis impact on that, the main objection has come down to this sodding tree, hasn't it? And it is absolutely ridiculous. And to quote Mr. Bumble and Oliver Twist, if the law supposes that, then the law is an ass. And it certainly is not the intention of the BNG thing to think that that piece of grass there, or that area of the lower gardens, is impacted. And Councillor Gillett, deserves a massive round of applause for that. It's one of the best ever presentations from council I've ever heard in one of these committee meetings. And I think the point he was making about it was the Lower Gardens Trust that approved the removal of the tree, by no means did he ever say anywhere in there, because I was waiting for him to say it, that the applicant asked them to remove it. But upon that discovery of that tree being removed, whatever the motivations of the Lower Gardens Trust to do that, which is supported by this council, the tree was removed. And separate to that, they've gone and said, would they look at replanting it or providing the trees, which the applicant has offered to do, which I don't actually think is necessarily something they should do. I agree 100% with Councillor Gillett. It's the council that removed the tree. The Parks people removed it at the behest of the Lower Parks Gardens Trust. The fact that it is then the trigger for a BNG, it triggers the BNG application for a piece of grass which is identified as poor. There's virtually no biological, environmental benefits to that piece of grass, and it's changed quite a bit over time. I think it's absolutely ludicrous. I'm really struggling to see why we are spending this much time on it. I get the fact that it's triggered a certain thing, and I respect the officers for pointing out that it's met a legal trigger. And if we have to break a law as a council, who's going to prosecute us over this? Over one cherry tree? Well, if somebody wants to bring a judicial review, absolutely, or whatever means it's going to be. If we have to recuse ourselves, then that's it. We could do lots of things to improve the BNG of Lower Gardens. We could replant a wildflower meadow. My concerns, the only concerns I had, and at the start of the report was referred to about reinstatement of the grass, and I was concerned this year when I went down to the Lower Gardens to see that the grass hadn't grown back, and I spoke to some of the grounds staff that work in there, and I says, "Oh, what's happening about this grass?" And there was going to be I don't know if it was a hydraulic or a pneumatic, basically to stop compaction. So the reason the grass isn't growing back is because of compaction. And there was a plan to do that. It was done very late in the year, which is why we saw in August, which is outside of the grass growing period, because of the dry weather, the grass didn't have a chance. So I would be very minded to approve this, but I want to see that those grass mitigation works, be it even a wildflower meadow, whatever you're doing with the grass, I don't really care. But I want to see that grass back in time. That's the only objection I've got here. I can't believe we're having such a protracted discussion about a cherry tree, which the council cut down, which caused the problem from the applicant. And if we have to approve this and be damned by the law for it, or by anybody who wants to bring a private prosecution against us, is fine. Just a point on the governance as well. I completely agree with the council that raised the issue about governance and the timing. And I wholeheartedly agree that this should go to OSB, because it's not the first time where we found an application on council property that has been found wanting from the planning timing or the overview. I think it's got better in recent years, but we are still finding so many of these applications that are getting caught in this thing. It's BCP land, but it's a private operator, and are we doing the right thing? So planning up against our commercial operations. But this is a fantastic facility. It needs to be approved. It needs to be approved. I don't want to kick it into the long grass and say we're going to refuse it, they're going to appeal it, because it's just kicking that down the road for next year and setting a dangerous precedent for next year if we're going to do it. What I want to see this facility up and running, our families enjoying the amenity of it, bringing tourists into Bournemouth, but I also want it in the spring. I want to see that grass there, and I want to see people out there sitting on the grass in the summertime, enjoying that, having a cigarette, playing music, sitting around, juggling, whatever you want to do on the grass in the lower gardens in the summer. Absolutely fantastic. But I don't want to see this kicked into the long grass by deferring it. If there is a way of deferring the BNG part of it, and it sounds like it doesn't take a lot to get that BNG statement, I think that the baseline assessment is a red herring. No disrespect to our officers, but to ask for a full re-baseline assessment of the lower gardens, which is devoid of any sort of interest. I mean, it's not exactly a wildlife sanctuary, is it? The lower gardens. It is for the birds, as far as I'm concerned. So that's where I stand on this. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Tarling. Councillor Salmon. Obviously, we couldn't do anything to break the law, so any conditions we would have to follow. So the deferment seems to be the best way to encourage a conversation. But Councillor Salmon.
Sorry, no objection. You said that we can't break the law.
Legislation.
I disagree with that.
Councillor Salmon.
Okay, thank you. So first thing to say, I still don't really understand why the BNG issue turned this from a delegated decision to a committee one on its own. I'm afraid I don't understand that. And there's been a mistake somewhere along the line, very clearly, and it's a bit of a mess. But I hear that officers are giving us their best advice and that our legal advisors confirm that to be legally correct. I'm not picking up any appetite from anywhere in this room to refuse this application, with the outcome that potentially the whole Christmas offering in the lower gardens would have to close. That serves absolutely no one and would clearly do more harm than good in just so many different ways. So we do need to look at what's happened here and to learn some lessons, to amend our processes, or in some other way find assurances that this very undesirable situation won't happen again. The place to do that is not here. Councillor Tarling referred to it, and if I can just briefly put my ONS chair's hat on, I will accept that recommendation that was made by Councillor Armstrong, that this be looked at by ONS, and I'll take that away for action in that forum. Mr. Convery's suggestion seems to me to be very helpful. I hear officer's reservations that it doesn't seem very promising given the failure of discussions on B&G up to now, that a resolution will be found. However, I am primarily concerned, unlike Councillor Darling, that we as a committee follow processes and comply with the law. This proposed course of action from Mr. Convery seems to me to give us a way to do that, and so I think we should take it.
Okay, thank you for that. Was that a proposal?
Yes, I'm happy to propose that we follow the advice Mr. Convery laid out to defer the, I think he suggested we would be minded to grant, but we defer the application pending the further
And it would, defer
resolution
would
of
come
this
to the...
BNG issue, and then it would be delegated to the Chief Planning Officer for the final decision. That was, I think, what Mr. Convery outlined earlier, and I'd be happy to propose that as a way forward.
Mr. Bishop, was that your understanding that it would be?
Yes, you'd be entitled to defer the application if you so wished. I think what the Mr. Convery was referring to was that it would be a deferral on the basis that it gives the applicant an opportunity to address the B&G issue. And I think, just to be clear, I think the focus has been placed wrongly here on the loss of the tree. I think if people focus their energy and effort on providing the B&G information that we require, then we wouldn't be in this situation. You know, we have tried to work with the applicant. We've offered solutions. They were not forthcoming. So we are not against this application in principle, but we need to comply with the legislation. You know, I have conversations every day, practically, with other developers bemoaning B&G and the effect it has on their scheme. We have to apply legislation consistently across the board. That's what we're doing with this application. We're also offering the applicant solutions and a way to try and resolve the problem. So if you wanted to defer the application on the basis that it gives the applicant more time to find a solution to their problem, to the issue, then that's something which can be entertained. I would just be mindful that we have been negotiating this for somewhere between 6 and 8 weeks now. I've got not much further forward.
Okay, and to the point, would deferment mean it comes back to committee, or we could say that we delegate to yourself?
You can delegate it, yeah, subject to head of planning finding an agreeable solution.
Okay, so does your proposal to the deferment still hold true? Councillor Clements, would you second that, or you want to speak on something else?
I will second it. Actually, that was what I was going to suggest, so I don't need to speak. Thanks.
Yeah, I just need to clarify that if you're delegating it, then you'll need to make that clear as to whether it's delegate to the head of planning to find the solution, and if a solution can't be found, whether it needs to come back to committee or not, or whether it can be a delegated refusal. You need to make that clear in your recommendation.
Councillor Salmon, what's your preference on that? To come back if a solution doesn't come, to come back to committee?
I don't know that I see any benefit to that, because if the solution can't be found, then the exact same set of circumstances remain, and we're having a discussion around that now. So from my point of view, the delegation would be to the head of planning from this point. But I'm happy to hear other people's point of view.
And you're happy, Councillor Clements as seconder, to delegate, and whether it is refusal? Yeah.
I'm happy with the deferment.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Canavan.
Well, I think if we're delegating it, in order to give the applicant more time to resolve the BNG issue, if the solution can't be found, it has to come back here. I'm not prepared to delegate. Well, I'm personally not prepared to delegate that to the officer to determine. Because let's say, for the sake of argument, the officer refuses it again. If that's the situation, it has to come back here. Because what the committee is saying is that we, as Councillor Slade mentioned earlier on, we need to find a solution to make this happen, and not keep putting obstacles in the way of this. So that's what concerns me. I'm quite happy to defer it, but I'm seeking to avoid a situation where we defer it and it's refused again, because that would be an absolute disaster. You know, it just occurs to me, Chair, what on earth are the public going to think about this discussion? It's a complete nonsense. So, I mean, I absolutely agree with Councillor Slade, we have to find a way forward. But if officers refuse it again, for whatever reason, it has to come back here.
Okay, so just go back to the proposal of Councillor Salmon. So you weren't initially happy with that. Are you happy to?
Well, I do take a different view on that, but so I don't know if we therefore need to go to a vote on what the proposal specifically is, if there are two slightly separate ones.
Yeah. Okay, we'll see what extra debate. Councillor Pedevin.
Thank you. I don't think there can be many people in the whole of BCP who actually want to see this not happen or not continue happening because it's already started. But I mean, the lesson I'm taking from this, particularly after what Mr. Bishop has just said, is that no application is so vital that we don't follow the procedures and do things right. And I think it's a lesson to all applicants that if they're asked for information, be it BNG or be it something else, they've got to provide it and provide it in due time. The problem with this one is that for most applications, you could say, well, we wait till it comes in and then we act. But in a time limited thing like this, like the Winter Wonderland or whatever it's called, the ice rink, it's got to happen on a specific date or else it becomes a nonsense. But I think it's a lesson to all applicants, all developers and householder applicants for that matter. If planning department ask you for information, please provide it or else it's not going to happen or it's going to make it all very complicated.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think Councillor Slade was ahead of me.
We don't know who you were. Just.
I don't think it's just a question of a message to applicants. For me, is what is the message for us as an authority about this? We can't just pass all the blame to applicants and say, you give us, 10 tons of information or else. I mean, that's just, we need to find a situation. And I think it was Councillor Martin earlier on that made the point. If we're having a recurring annual event, I can't believe we don't have a baseline information on BNG. I can't believe that we don't do that. So why are we asking every time for some kind of BNG assessment to be made when we're doing it every year? We must know that situation now. So, I get we have to treat every application on its merits. I've heard that so many times now. But the point about this is that if we are requiring, because some bit of legislation requires us to have to go through these metrics, and we need a baseline. We need baseline information. Why aren't we doing it anyway? Coming back to the point that I've made earlier on, somehow or another, we have to let this operation continue for the rest of the season. Because to do otherwise, I think would be not only damaging to the operator, but hugely damaging to the reputation of us as an authority, because I just think we're making ourselves look really daft.
Thank you. I think obviously we have sort of set the baseline. Now we know that BNG applies. Previous years, BNG didn't apply. So I think that's a distinction. Councillor Slade.
Thanks. I agree with Councillor Canavan's earlier point. If it is deferred, I'd want it to come back here. That then leads to, do we have an emergency meeting? I just need to understand that. But I also want to know is, if we do defer, what happens to the current operation? Does it cease? Does it stop? What happens with that?
Mr. Bishop will confirm, but I understand it would carry on.
Well, yeah, we would need to understand the expediency of taking enforcement action. So, and given that we'd be working with the applicant and trying to find a solution, I think it'd be unlikely that we would serve a notice whilst the decision is still pending.
Okay, so I think from what people have said, majority of people have suggested that they would want it coming back to committee, and I think I saw Councillor Clements, the second, nodding her head. Councillor Summons?
In that case, I'm happy for that to be the amended proposal. I'm not going to die on that hill. Okay,
So the proposal is deferment to the head of planning to come to a BNG solution. If it is If the suggestion is to refuse, then it comes back to committee. That's right. That's Councillor Tarling.
Yeah, with that, I think Mr. Gould has mentioned this a few times about the minded to approve, and I think we have to make a statement that we are minded to approve this, but, and then the amendment, because I think that's quite key, is that we've accepted all the other inputs and constraints, and we are literally just boiling it down to the BNG thing, that we have considered all the other impacts, planning, guidance and policies and so and everything, and we've weighed everything else in the balance, and it's just this bit, this legislative bit, that we need to put right to do it. So
it's not actually a decision though, so we're not making a decision, we are deferring that decision.
Minded to be approved.
Yeah, I don't think that's appropriate for a deferment, because we're not making a decision. No.
Okay.
Well, if you're deferring it, it's coming back to committee. So I think you need to make a recommendation to approve, subject to head of planning being happy with the BNG information, with a secondary recommendation to be should a satisfactory BNG not be reached, the application be returned to committee.
Hello, yeah.
So the committee defers the application to allow the applicant a further opportunity to resolve the BNG issues, and then delegate authority to the head of planning to grant the application, or if the head of planning is minded to refuse the application, refer determination back to the committee.
Yes, I'd agree that.
I didn't think much more. We should just.
Yeah, I think you need to do one or the other. I don't think you can defer and delegate. I think you need to approve subject to, or if you defer it, that just means it's coming back. But I might be standard correct. Maybe Mr.
Convery. Mr. Convery.
Yes, I think the the appropriate wording would be that the committee is minded to grant the permission, subject to the BNG condition being the BNG situation being resolved, and therefore grant the chief planning officer the authority to grant the permission, but that it return to committee if he's not so minded.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. So yeah, thank you. So I think that's clear. Councillor Salmon, yeah.
Yes, that was what I'd originally understood, and I'm happy with that. Thank you.
And Ms. Holyoake, you've got that. Okay, so Mr. Bishop, nothing else to add?
No.
No. Okay, so we've got that proposal and seconded. So if you're in favour to approve, vote now.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That's unanimous.
Okay, that is approved as just stated. Thank you. So that brings the meeting to an end. There is some training. So we're closing down.